I was given a new life, and she will not miss this chance, and will not repeat Helen's previous mistake, but will live a happy life. With these thoughts, the girl opened her eyes and, rising from the warm bed, stretched. Smiling, she looked at the sleeping boy next to her and told Keller that it was time to get up and that he needed to eat. The baby opened his eyes. This child's name was Keller Venuet. He was the main character of this novel, but he fell asleep again. Eleanor laughed at him, and just a week ago she was reborn as the villain of a romance novel. In a past life, she failed an unknown number of interviews and was crossing the road while thinking about it. Suddenly she heard a child crying in unison with the loud sound of the horn of a speeding car. The child cried bitterly while sitting on a pedestrian crossing because he had fallen awkwardly and scratched his arms and knees. Frightened for the baby, the girl ran up to the boy without thinking the truck rushing towards her didn't even slow down. "Watch out!" she shouted loudly at the boy and pushed him back from the truck that was running towards him, all in an instant. However, she herself was unable to save herself at the last moment. She only saw how he was approaching her, and the headlights were blinding her eyes. There was a loud boom. Then everything went dark. Opening her eyes, she saw a thick fog in front of her, which gradually dissipated. Looking around, she wondered if she was dead, trying to comprehend it. But she didn't want to leave like this. Her head was filled with various thoughts when a strange window appeared before my eyes. The girl suggested that even the afterlife is automated in the digital age, reading the text on the window. The first option was to go to the judgment of heaven or hell, and the second was to be reborn in another world, as the window gave a countdown. It was too unexpected. She had to think about it. She was not prepared for divine judgment. But the second option is also drawn. This warning is not accurate, but another world meant another life, if you judge. What should I do? She thought nervously when there were 2 seconds left on the timer, and, closing her eyes, she clicked on the second option. So she hoped that the next life would be a little kinder, and that's how she ended up in this love story. When she first opened her eyes, she thought it was a typical fantasy world, but as soon as she saw Keller, she realized that she was inside a novel she had read a long time ago. Even after being reborn, she still found herself in the role of a doomed villain. Perhaps she felt a strange connection with Keller and his destiny. She was also a scumbag, and Eleanor started to get attached to him. Keller is the illegitimate son of the Venuet ducal family. He was abandoned in an orphanage at birth, and even there the adults treated him terribly. It was later revealed that he was in fact the heir of Manhwa, and so the boy was returned to the estate. But then his real suffering began. Because of the trauma inflicted by the orphanage, Keller was terrified of adults. So the butler, thinking he was helping the young lord, brought him his wife, Eleanor McClare, and then everything went topsy-turvy. Eleanor tormented Keller by doing all sorts of horrible things and gradually took control of the entire estate. Helen still felt sick just thinking about it. Thank God the main character came along later. But later, Keller receives an imperial order and goes to the battlefield while still a child. And there he meets his love, the princess of the kingdom of Dane, the main character of the novel. Eleanor puffed out her cheeks since she had to be reborn in the novel, so why couldn't she become a heroine? Having earned great glory on the battlefield, Keller returns home with the princess and demands a divorce from Helen. But what does Eleanor do in response to the request? Right, she breaks the contract right in front of her husband and his beloved. Moreover, she then begins to mock the princess who is staying at their estate. And as if that wasn't enough, she tries to kill the princess by creating a poison that turns the entire body into stone. All this is pure evil. She is some kind of alchemical genius, and she uses it to kill people, the new owner of the body reasoned. Luckily, Keller finds out everything before Eleanor does this and kicks his wife out of the estate. But then, as if in poetic justice, she contracts an incurable disease with exactly the same symptoms as her poison. And she dies a lonely death in the slums, just like a real villain, and now, unfortunately, she has become this villain. The girl kept waking Keller up, saying that if he had breakfast, she would read him a story. As soon as the boy heard the word fairy tale, his eyes opened without any additional help, and soon he stood up on his own. Looking at him now, Eleanor thought that a week ago he was very afraid of her, but now he was finally letting her get closer. The girl thought that if you shared a bed, you would gradually become closer. He probably missed warm hugs. Seriously, she thought, looking at Keller's head, how could anyone harm such a sweet child? For once she was living slowly and measuredly. Eleanor will raise Keller properly, differently than in the original story, and even create a cure for this incurable disease. Then she will quietly accept this divorce and leave. She will raise him well and pass him on to the heroine. While Keller slept, Helen wondered if she should start planning for the future. After a long conversation with Keller, she finally had time, but little came to mind at the moment. The plan was to keep Keller well-fed until he went into battle, defending the estate and searching for a cure for an incurable disease. She would not like to let him go, but Duke Manhwa must fight under the Emperor's command. There was nothing she could do about it. Keller will be only 13 when he goes to the battlefield, where he will face all sorts of humiliations because of his small body. But he will grow up a lot. Nevertheless, tears welled up since she will have to send him there. And the second plan is that the territory of the duchy is vast and fertile, but due to lack of attention, the plant population has decreased. Also, in the original, Eleanor, while researching magic potions, created all sorts of bad drugs and threw them into the lake or forest, destroying them. The area was not polluted yet, so there was hope. She needed to find a magic potion that would make the land more fertile. It is also necessary to find a cure for an incurable disease. Helen fell ill with this disease, because of which her body became immobile. It makes you feel better when you think that this is the fate of the villain, but she didn't want to die like this, but wanted to live a long and healthy life. The next morning, the butler brought Eleanor the financial report she had requested earlier. Her father, Earl McClare, was an incredibly stupid and greedy man, and Norman was afraid that she would be like him when he brought her to the duchy. In truth, the lady's choice was due to the lack of options. No one was ready to send their precious daughter. The illegitimate heir of the poor duchy was not trusted. The previous Duke and Duchess were extremely extravagant people. They loved to drink, and in addition, they became alcoholics and abandoned the estate. Eventually, both died of a heart attack. If they had not made him heir, the estate would have ended up in the hands of the previous Duke's younger brother, the Count of Bologna. Norman did not want to see the Duchy of Manhwa, to which he had dedicated his life, fall at the hands of the evil Count of Bologna. So he desperately looked for this child of the Duke, born of a servant, and sheltered him directly. However, due to the treatment he received at the orphanage, the young gentleman was very afraid of adults and could not adapt to the new environment at all. That's why he thought he needed a wife who would be like a sister to him, and he was recognized as the official heir by the Emperor. They had taken great pains to prepare the dowry, but the state of the duchy was well known to others. Therefore, it was difficult to find a suitable candidate for marriage. Only Count McClare did not hesitate to sell his daughter, and he even personally signed a contract promising not to interfere in her affairs anymore. She must have suffered from her father's actions, but she keeps her face. He, Norman, promised to serve her faithfully until the end of his days, while Eleanor carefully studied the papers. As expected, she thought through narrowed eyes. The Keller family had once been a powerful and prestigious house. The first Duke of Manhwa was a war hero who conquered vast lands on his own. But because Keller's father, the previous Duke, has neglected the running of the house for years, they are now in great financial difficulties. Somewhere in the castle, the former Duke hid gold coins and jewels. In the original story, Eleanor finds and spends them. If she found them, she would solve her financial problems, and so she asked the Norman to find a fencing teacher from the knightly order for Keller. If he wants to lead the house, he needs to start now. The man understood the girl and said that he would find him. Norman's chest tightened as he walked out of the office. Now he could greet the former Duke with dignity. While walking with her husband in the yard, Eleanor told Keller not to eat too many sweets, and he understood her. The boy put the cookies he had just taken back into the basket and sighed in disappointment, and Helen felt uneasy. She wanted to give him as much as he wanted, but too much sweet stuff is not healthy. Her heart ached for him, and then she suggested playing tag. Keller immediately and enthusiastically agreed. Eventually, children have to run, and then Eleanor told Keller that he was water and had to catch it. The boy nodded. At the same time, Eleanor asked Keller to call her lady. The young gentleman asked why exactly that way, and the girl said that until he brought the princess into the house, she would be a lady. Keller asked about the princess. It didn't matter, she replied. In any case, since she was his lady, he should call her that, and he happily agreed. Then Eleanor told the boy the rules of the game and told him to count from 10 to 1 and then catch her. Keller began to count, watching as Eleanor ran away, moving further and further away from him. At that moment, the boy was overcome by a strange, soul-stirring feeling, and, having counted only to 7, he called the lady. Realizing that Keller had stopped counting and called her, the girl looked back in surprise. Suddenly, Keller unexpectedly and tightly hugged her, joyfully exclaiming that he had caught her. Eleanor was amazed at the cunning and dishonest outcome of the tag round and exclaimed that it was cheating. However, Keller only laughed heartily in response, and Eleanor could not resist this laughter. She hugged the boy back, stroking his head with her hand, and Keller himself thought that he liked the lady. The young man hoped that she would never go anywhere. Kind and gentle lady, he would never let her go. From today on, Eleanor was counting on Sir Byrne to train the Duke, and the green-eyed boy agreed. The man agreed to the request, but the Duke turned out to be a cowardly boy who was hiding behind the girl's skirt. It was obvious to Eleanor, who was watching him, what he was thinking, and she definitely needed to figure it out. And so she explained that Keller was bullied in the orphanage, which is why he is afraid of adults. Now he is a child, but one day he will lead the knightly order. Therefore, she asked Sir Byrne to take care of the young Duke as she pleases. He answered. What struck him was that such a little girl was behaving so maturely, and at that time Helen turned to Keller and said that he was a good man. She would be next to him, so he didn't have to worry, and she pointed to a bench where he could see her. Realizing that these were completely safe conditions, the boy nodded in agreement, which made the girl happy. The fencing teacher, who was watching them at this time, was processing the words about him being a good person. While watching the young Duke train, Eleanor read about making magic potions. It was easier than she thought. Perhaps thanks to Eleanor's innate intelligence, she can clearly understand the entire structure. This brain is not only created for brewing potions, but it is also born with the mana of the earth and wind. Wasn't that too much in her opinion? Using her only as a villain was a waste, but the ability was useful. There was no denying it. The method of making potions is not complicated. The problem is in the ingredients, she needs all kinds of herbs and fruits, ideally if she had a greenhouse. There was one in this estate, but it hadn't been used for a long time. It would cost a lot of money to repair. Maybe it would be worth making it a little bigger. She'll probably have to break into the secret vault soon, but she'll be making and selling potions, so she'll get it all back later. It was all for the sake of the estate, so here Eleanor turned her gaze to the trainees. He must understand. But then she looked more closely. The girl did not notice this, as she was concentrated on the book. As the sword was knocked out of the Duke's hands and the boy himself fell tiredly on his butt, Byrne asked his lord to get up, and beaming, as if his whole fate depended on it, he said, holding the wooden sword tightly, "But why do they conduct sparring in the first lesson?" Once again, the man exclaimed loudly in the process. It cut into Eleanor's ears, and then she turned to Byrne, reminding him that he was afraid of adults. And if he was pointing the sword so aggressively, what was he expecting? She screamed, imagining what it would look like for a child. And without pressing or giving him the opportunity to justify himself, she continued asking him to be attentive and more gentle. Byrne said guiltily that he understood. After this, Helen sat Keller on her back and, thanking Sir Byrne for his efforts, suggested that they finish there. After the children had gone far enough, Byrne said that in order to do this, he had to teach someone at least once in a gentler way. Well, the overbearing parents were a bit demanding, the boy thought, narrowing his eyes. Remembering the Duke's steadfast and cold gaze during sparring, he looked forward to their further lessons. As night fell, Eleanor prepared Keller for bed and helped him change into his pajamas. Looking at Keller's back, she remembered that when she first bathed Keller, she was horrified by the sight of these wounds. Thinking about this, Eleanor buttoned Keller's shirt while he silently watched her. But suddenly her gaze fell on the boy's hand, wounded by a wooden sword, and she asked if his hands hurt a lot. "Yes," he answered with tears in his eyes. If you think about it, he didn't cry openly, Eleanor thought. He was trying his best to hold back his tears, and it impressed her, but suddenly she stopped. She asked Keller if the adults at the orphanage scolded him when he cried, and the boy nodded. Eleanor shuddered with horror at the realization of what the young master might have gone through in the orphanage. How pathetic she was. Eleanor just thought it was impressive without even thinking. It's normal for him to cry when he wants to. The girl took his wounded hand and told Keller that if he wanted to cry, he didn't have to hold back. She asked him to just cry, because no one here would punish him for it, but the boy found it hard to believe. Holding out her little finger, she suggested that they promise each other that when he wants to cry, he will, but if he keeps it inside, he will get sick. It would be better to just cry heartily, and the boy, smiling happily and shaking his little finger, said that he would do it. She said that now they will apply the ointment. Those adults who harmed him, they are nothing at all. Seriously, she repeated insistently, they were nothing to him, but Keller was still afraid. And then Eleanor enthusiastically said that he didn't need to be afraid. She would scold each of them for him. The girl asked him if he remembered their faces and asked him to say any that came to mind. According to Keller's description, Eleanor drew their faces on paper, and after that they fell fast asleep together. When night fell, the servants came and carefully covered both children so that they would not freeze. Looking around the bed, she noticed a drawing above their heads, and picking it up thought how cute it was. And Eleanor, who had not yet fallen asleep, with her teeth clenched in a malicious smile, thought that if she saw these bastards, they would not live. When Norman saw the chest of gold from the previous duke that Eleanor had obtained, his jaw dropped and he asked Madame what it was. Eleanor happily replied that she was as shocked as he was and had not known that there was such a storage facility in the house. There was no clear description in the novel, so it was difficult to find, but who would have thought that it would be under the table in the Duke's office? After this, Eleanor handed Norman an envelope saying that it seemed to be a treasure that his grandfather left to his father. After reading the letter, written in the handwriting of the legendary Count, tears began to flow from Norman's eyes and he could not believe what he saw. While the butler was overcome by emotions, Helen was thinking about how she could use this money so that others would not arise. So the girl asked if she could use them, and Norman, wiping away tears, replied that all the money belonged to the Duke and Madame. And then Eleanor declared that with part of this gold, she asked to begin strengthening the Order of Knights. As a result, they will go to war with Keller, and in order to ensure safety, they must be strong. Strengthening the knightly order is necessary to protect the estate. They are currently ruled by a duke, so some may look down on them. The next moment, Norman enthusiastically agreed with Madame, and the girl thought in horror, so that's why they gave Helen the ducal title. He agreed without further questions, but in any case, the Order of Knights must quickly strengthen. And the right person for this job was found. It was Sir Byrne, whom Helen wanted to make commander. The guy was surprised when he heard this news, and Eleanor confirmed that this was necessary until Keller grew up. But even just the Duke's teaching is hard for him, and he is much busier than Madame thinks. And then the girl asked why he pretended to be so busy, even without a wife and children. This really hurt the guy. Moreover, the girl said, piercing Byrne with her gaze, he doesn't even have a lover, and this became the decisive blow. He fell to his knees in defeat and despair, and Eleanor, smiling triumphantly, asked him to take command for Keller's sake. While drinking tea within the walls of the mansion, Eleanor read the boy a book whose story had a happy ending. And then Keller exclaimed that a candy house was cool, asking the lady if they would live in one too. No, Eleanor answered him firmly, and explained with a stony expression that candy houses attract ants. This information greatly shocked Keller, frightened him, and left him sitting in mute horror. Seeing how upset Keller was, Eleanor thought, I'm sorry she's ruining his childhood dreams, but she hated ants. Perhaps it was because he never tried them at the orphanage, but the boy had a great love for sweets. But suddenly the look in her emerald eyes attracted something in her wife, and she asked Keller to stand up. And looking at the boy, she thoughtfully said that in her opinion, he had grown a little, thinking that children grow at night. Taking Keller by the hand, Eleanor led him to the wall, and drawing a stripe above his head, suggested that he mark his height there every year. Having also measured Keller's height, she pointed to her own and said that when he grows up, he will be taller than her. True, the boy asked, surprised and incredulous, and Eleanor, smiling sweetly, confirmed this to him. And all because in the original story Keller was described as a tall and handsome man, she was already very proud. Seeing that Eleanor was laughing, Keller asked her what was wrong, but she replied that he was just very handsome. I'm handsome, Keller asked in surprise, and Eleanor, hugging him tightly, confirmed that he was the most handsome in the world. After these words of Eleanor were deeply imprinted on Kell's heart, and his cheeks became slightly rosy. Hugging Eleanor tightly in return, he said that when he grows up and becomes taller like an adult, he will hug her like that too. Helen wished the child to grow big and strong, stroking his head, and thought that when he grew up, he would hug only the princess. But since she raised him, he will probably hug her at least once when he goes to war. Then Eleanor won't be able to measure his height for 10 whole years. Sad that she won't be able to see him for so long. Eleanor wanted to see him grow up. She wanted to see what he would look like when he fell in love. She was sure he would be charming. And yet she must continue to celebrate his growth until then. She would like to give him as many memories as possible. A few days later, Norman approached them with a proposal to combine birthdays, and Eleanor thought about it. Since the children's birthdays were close enough, Norman thought they could celebrate them together. That's why I came to discuss it, but maybe Eleanor has bad memories associated with birthdays. Norman was already afraid that he had made a huge mistake, but then the girl exclaimed that she liked the idea of the party. Not believing his ears, he asked if he could then help prepare everything, and, hearing consent, he beamed with happiness. Eleanor enjoyed the thought of her birthday, even if she had a poor memory. But Helen had no memories of such days. Earl McClare, who had not only legitimate but also illegitimate children, never celebrated a single birthday. And Eleanor was not particularly close to the other children, and her mother, her legal wife, was cold towards her. However, one pleasant memory came to mind of how her real brother once congratulated her. The girl also had no good memories from her past life. She was an orphan from birth. And she didn't even know her birthday, of course. She never had parties, so that means it will be her very first party. Eleanor's heart fluttered with joy when Keller suddenly asked what a birthday was. She explained that it was the day he was born, and replied that it was a very good day with lots of delicious food and gifts. Even snacks, Kell asked in fascination, and Eleanor confirmed that this was the day when he could eat until he was full. It seemed that Keller had never celebrated his birthday either. After all, he had grown up in terrible conditions, Helen thought. But what should I give him since he is a child? Then a toy should be suitable, even though he learns faster than ordinary people. The old Eleanor was fluent in the ancient language, so she taught Kell a few words out of curiosity. It made sense because later he would become a sword master who would use his mana to create an aura. The better a person's innate mana control, the easier it is to learn the ancient language, which means Keller has a high level of control. If Eleanor teaches Keller the ancient language now, it should help him in the future. So the day of the birthday party arrived, and, while congratulating the children, the servants asked the lady if she liked their gift. Beaming with happiness, Eleanor joyfully exclaimed that she really liked it, and the dress was really very beautiful, and therefore she thanked them. It was a relief for the maids, and the dress suited her very well, so now they too had to exchange gifts. The maid handed the gift Eleanor had collected to her, and the girl, hesitantly accepting it, gave it to Keller. However, she was worried, because she made it herself, and it turned out a little crooked, whether he would like it. However, as soon as Keller unwrapped the gift and took out the toy bunny, he hugged it and exclaimed that he really liked it. Norman asked the gentleman if it was his turn now, and the boy nodded excitedly. Eleanor was surprised that Keller would also give her something, and then the boy shyly handed her the box. After thanking Keller, Eleanor unwrapped her gift and laughed good-naturedly when she read the note and saw the many candies. Time passed quickly, and a year had already passed. Now Eleanor was already 14, and Keller 8. Norman reported that they needed more servants on the estate, and Eleanor asked him to take it on. Over the past year, Sir Byrne has led the knights very well, and thanks to him, newcomers have even joined their ranks. The maids were busy preparing food for the knights, and they decided to hire new workers. A few days ago, Keller stood confidently before the knights for the first time as their master. It was a knighting ceremony for new knights, and she held Keller's hand as he stood there nervously. Although he was nervous, he went through the ceremony with dignity, and Norman reported that repairmen would be arriving from tomorrow. Helen asked how long the construction would take, and he replied that there was not much work, so it would not take much time. Eleanor decided to use some of the remaining gold to repair the greenhouse and build a laboratory next to it. And also today she wanted to visit the market with Keller. Norman heard that she would go with Marie and Sir Byrne. That's true, but she was actually going to leave Keller, but he threw a fit, and in the end, she leaves the estate for the first time. Perhaps Eleanor kept him too close. He really didn't like being away from her. He wouldn't ask her to go with him to the battlefield, Eleanor worried. That could become a problem. Keller asked if she really needed to go there in person, and Helen replied that she needed to buy herbs from traveling merchants. Although she had collected many herbs, samples from the fields and forests outside the estate were not enough. To get samples from other regions, she needed the things that these traders brought. Soon the maid informed the mistress that the carriage was ready and called them to come through, and Eleanor, taking Keller by the hand, headed out into the street. Looking around, Eleanor thought that the market was more lively than she thought, although it was smaller compared to the estate. Byrne said that there were quite a lot of people here and asked the mistress and master to be careful. Eleanor thanked Sir Byrne and looked around the market, when suddenly Mara turned her lady's attention in the opposite direction. The delegation was quite impressive. It was the Rondia trading group. Marie had heard that they were traveling all over the continent. They seemed very famous, and Eleanor thought about their strange faces and the fact that there was a mention of them in the original. Mara noted with concern that she had said too much, and said that the lady did not need to know about this yet, even though she herself had spoken about them. While exploring the market, Keller and the heroine discovered the Rondia trading group, which was even in the east. The heroine, trying the perfume she bought there, accidentally used the one that attracts men instead of the usual one, which puts the princess in a difficult situation, and then Keller shows up and cold-bloodedly saves her. Also in this episode, the first kiss happens, so young, she thought, looking at Kel, and already. Then she thought about whether she should research perfumes and thought that she should buy a sample because it was a profitable business. Helen asked Marie that if she were to buy them, she would buy some for her too, and the girl replied that she wanted to study them. Mara wondered in surprise how she even knew about Rondia's special perfume, but she went to buy it anyway. There were indeed more people than Eleanor had expected and asked Sir Byrne to keep an eye on Keller. But suddenly, the man loudly announced that they had brought some interesting goods and showed a talking cat doll. The interested people immediately rushed towards the man, knocking children off their feet and separating them from each other. Because of the crush in the square, Eleanor could no longer hold Keller's hand, and the boy was overcome with horror. Eleanor herself was very scared that she might lose Keller in the crowd like that. Having escaped from the crowd, Eleanor began searching for the cellarer together with Marie and Byrne, but he was nowhere to be found, and the anxiety grew. They decided to check some places again, and ended up undressing while Kel wandered into some alley. He walked quietly across the yard, covering his face with his hands, but then some grown-up young men appeared on his path. They smiled menacingly and asked if he was Keller. It seemed that he had been taken into a rich family. The boy shuddered. The guy walked forward, and Kel walked back, some of them surviving by working as pickpockets, while he wears nice clothes and lives happily. And grabbing Keller by the collar, he approached him face to face and ordered him to give everything he had, even the clothes he was wearing, absolutely everything. Tears of fear welled up in Keller's eyes, and he begged the lady to help him when suddenly the hooligans were called out. Keller turned around and saw a pink beam of light in the passage. His mistress, who was looking warily at the hooligans. "Madam," the boys looked at each other in surprise. "He's only 7, aren't they just playing?" But unlike the hooligans, Eleanor was serious about saving her husband and extended her hand to Kel. The girl told the boy to come here. The boy saw her as a support and was very touched when he found help. Taking a confident step, he ran up to Eleanor and hugged her tightly, and the girl hugged her back. Having torn herself away from her feelings, Eleanor asked with displeasure who they were and how they knew Keller. The older boy replied that they were from an orphanage, just like this little guy, and his friend grinned and asked if this coward was hiding under the lady's skirt. "If you scare him a little more, he'll wet his pants," just like Eleanor shouted, "Hey!" Both boys froze in horror. Something in their chests clenched when they felt the pressing aura from the girl. She told them to shut up, and the older guy angrily asked why the hell she, a brat, was acting like a hero. Soon, Sir Beru was informed that they had found the mistress and master, and then the knight ran to them. He was worried whether the lady was okay, but then he saw how Helen was holding the most talkative one by the hair and reading him a moral lesson. Sir Byrne, dumbfounded, asked what was going on, and Eleanor, noticing him, exclaimed that he was just in time. The guys noticed the knight and immediately ran away. Byrne asked if they should catch up with them, but Eleanor let them go. He asked who these children were, and Helen explained that they knew Keller from the orphanage, but how many children like him were there in the area? "Well, such children can be found everywhere," Byrne answered, "but they are becoming more common lately. As soon as the greenhouse is finished, Eleanor has to walk around the city, but suddenly she notices some kind of brooch on the floor. She picked it up and Byrne noticed that it looked like an old brooch, but it looked like some kind of artifact. It could be a real artifact. Artifacts are disposable items that contain different spells. Most of the artifacts containing ancient magic have disappeared, so this must be one of the new ones created by modern magicians. Regardless of date and manufacturer, artifacts are luxury items that only nobles could afford. Those kids probably just stole it, and they had to return it to its rightful owner. But then a strange voice called out to them. A man from the eastern countries asked worriedly if they had seen 2 boys of about this height. Showing the boy's height with his hands, he said that they had stolen his brooch, but then he saw the relic in Eleanor's hands. It was the brooch he had lost when the girl gave him the brooch, and the man howled with joy, remembering his mother. He thought he would never see it again after the theft, and the girl said she found the brooch when the children dropped it while running away. The man, crying with joy and hugging the brooch to himself, sincerely thanked the girl this brooch as a memory of his mother. He said that they both were his saviors, and suddenly remembered that he forgot to introduce himself, and wiping away his tears, smiled. Putting his hand on his chest, the man introduced himself as Circa, the head of the Rondia Trade Guild. Helen asked again in surprise. Helen thoughtfully asked what he had said about her being his savior, and the man exclaimed that she had found a priceless memento of his mother. He was supposed to give her something, but Eleanor refused the gifts. Instead, she invited him to visit their estate. Putting her arm around Keller's shoulders, she sweetly said that this child was the Duke of the Manhwa estate and asked him to stop by the estate before leaving the city. Helen was worried about selling if she started making potions, but now everything will fall into place. Cirque was very surprised by the name Manhwa. There was a very noisy and frightening thunderstorm that night. Keller slept restlessly and seemed to be tormented by nightmares. He remembered and dreamed of a man from the orphanage who scolded him for causing problems. "No," Keller said in a trembling voice, stepping back and apologizing, saying that he was sorry. He asked him to forgive him again, but his eyes clearly reflected the silhouette of the man who was swinging at him. While beating the boy with a strong stick, he shouted what a brat he was. What a useless creature, that's why he was abandoned. The boy curled up into a ball and trembled violently, covering his head, but then Eleanor called out to him. She, looking at the boy's pitiful appearance, told Keller that he would be abandoned again because he deserved it. Seeing and hearing this in his dream, the boy opened his eyes in horror and jumped out of bed, breathing heavily. He tried to calm down and feel for Eleanor next to him, but he became even more frightened when he did not find his mistress nearby. He sat on the bed and clutched the blanket, and tears flowed bitterly from his eyes from the fear of being abandoned, under the impression after the nightmare. But then the light from the candle illuminated Keller's face, and Eleanor called out to him and asked if he was awake. She heard thunder, so she came to check on him and, stroking his cheek, asked if he had had another nightmare. Keller silently looked at Eleanor, remembering what happened today. He let go of the lady's hand. Today she came to find him, but next time she might not come, she might leave him. No, that was definitely not it. He couldn't be abandoned, and so he pressed himself tightly against Eleanor and clutched her nightgown. She can beat and torture him, she can do whatever she wants, and cryingly say that he will behave well. Sobbing, he promised that he would not throw a tantrum and therefore asked not to leave him. Helen hugged the boy. He was scared of what happened earlier. She told him to cry until he felt better. Even if she told him to sleep, he couldn't, and asked if Keller wanted to play shadow theater, but Kel didn't know what it was. Having placed the candle on the floor and seated the boy opposite her, she ordered him to look carefully and showed him the shadow of the puppy. The boy watched with enthusiasm as Eleanor deftly changed the shadows with her hands, showing different animals. Eleanor could see that Kelu was having fun, so Eleanor felt like he was a little more at ease, and that was a relief. After this theater, the boys went to bed, and Keller thought about why the lady was so kind. Watching her sleep, he thought about this, and about how useless he himself was, remembering the first day of their meeting. That day he was sitting huddled in a ball, pressed into a corner and crying, when suddenly she came. Eleanor was glowing and radiating kindness. She sat down next to me and started a conversation. The lady was very kind. He approached the sleeping girl and, looking at the girl, closed his eyes again, thinking that he did not want to be separated from her. Eleanor sighed heavily, and Marie asked her mistress why she looked so depressed. It didn't matter, she replied. Eleanor sometimes visited the maids to chat with them. She had not made any progress yet, and did not even know what medicine to prepare for her, and that man would soon come here. It seemed to Marie that something was bothering Tessa too, and the girl responded with alarm that everything was fine. She just had a stomachache. Leah offered to bring some spirit grass, but Tess didn't like it, and then Eleanor became interested in the conversation. She asked what kind of spiritual herb it was. Was it medicinal? Leah replied that it looked like an ordinary weed. In her village, they used it as a painkiller, but it wasn't very effective and was very bitter, so it was almost forgotten. Marie warned with concern that this was true. It was extremely bitter, and Eleanor, thinking about it, realized that this was what she was looking for. Together with Leah, Eleanor and Keller went out to look for this herb, but whatever she found, there were weeds. Now Eleanor understood why the spiritual herb was not used. It was too similar to a weed and impossible to distinguish. Leah also sometimes got confused and, to be honest, even in the village, only her grandfather used it. She put the blade of grass she found into her mouth and immediately grimaced from the bitterness of the taste. It was that grass. If you can identify a herb by its taste, then why not just try it and choose the right one, she thought, and put the herb in her mouth. However, trying too much was dangerous, and Helen already realized this, but too late, Keller ran up to the lady out of concern. Even if it is a herb, it is still used. It took Leah a long time to get used to the taste. Everyone simply advised her to see a doctor instead of this medicine, and most people know little about this herb. Helen also heard about it for the first time, but why is it called that? Leah answered that this is not the exact name. That's what her grandfather called it. For poor people like them, this painkiller that can be found in nature, he called it a gift from the spirits. To be honest, Eleanor said, the name Devil's Weed would be more appropriate because of the taste. Leah asked if the lady was really going to make a magic potion and was very surprised by it. It was no wonder that she looked at Eleanor with surprise. After all, magicians are very rare. Magic in this world was a remnant of ancient nature worship. Long ago, a great magician, born of nature, passed on magic to people. His students recorded his magic in an ancient language to pass on to future generations, but the temple kept an eye on the magicians. They confiscated most of the books written in the ancient language and declared them forbidden, so the magicians could not develop power. Since there were few wizards, only rich magicians could enjoy the fruits of magic, as did the nobility, who always had access to treatment. So the potions that would be more useful to commoners remained in the same hands. The best solution was to take herbs from a healer and brew tea. If someone becomes seriously ill or seriously injured, they usually try to find a priest, even despite the difficult circumstances. But there are no priests in the Manhwa territory. If she can make a potion, it will help Keller when he goes to war. The greenhouse and laboratory were almost ready, so now the success of the disease relief project was entirely in her hands. After the laboratory was completed, Eleanor began creating the potion and finally completed it. A magical potion whose creation results depend on when, how, and how much mana is introduced. So it was an endless cycle of try-hards and fail-hards, but she's who she is, so it's no surprise that she finally got it right. The pain relief was improved early on, but she couldn't handle the bitterness for a long time, and now it's the perfect pain reliever. After being saturated with mana, the bitterness diminished, and she turned the potion into a tablet for easy use. Most of the medicines on the market are potions, so this pill will seem much more convenient, and I tested it myself, slightly injuring myself. And she didn't feel it at all. She wanted others to try it. It was time to test it. Eleanor walked up to Tess and Marie, asking if anyone was in pain or injured. The girls turned around. The girl remembered that Tess said that she felt bad, but the girl was already fine. Then Eleanor wondered who to test the painkiller on, and Marie suggested testing it on the Order of Knights. It was a great idea, and taking Keller with her, she arrived at the order, and the knights thought that the lady would not come today. Usually she would come and scold the dirt, ordering it to be cleaned up immediately or draw attention to the unkempt swords. These fleeting memories flashed painfully through the knights' heads. What would she grumble about today? However, here Eleanor happily asked if anyone was hurt, and the knights breathed a sigh of relief that she had not come to grumble. When suddenly one person raised his hand and said that she was here, Eleanor looked away and grimaced. Lady Lola waved her hand happily and said that their little lady was as beautiful today as ever. She always acted as if Helen was her little sister, and the girl asked the lady with displeasure if she was hurt. "Not me," the girl answered, paying attention to the knight behind her. "Ray got it good at the last training session." "It's true," he said, apparently the only person who is constantly beaten by his beloved. Then Eleanor took a pill out of the jar and handed it to him, saying that it was a magic potion made by her. I asked him if he wanted to try it, but it wasn't really medicine. It had a pain-relieving effect. The man wondered if it was poison or something, and his mistress asked him irritably if he thought she would give him something like that. Lady Lola hit her lover on the sore shoulder and said that she would drink poison if it was from the lady, but the man shrank. He tearfully glanced at the lady and said that, in general, it didn't hurt that much, and then Eleanor gave Lola the green light. The next moment, the girl hugged the guy from behind and said, "Stop resisting and just drink." His face turned red. Ray asked to let him go, but when his mouth was open, Eleanor managed to give him a pill and then asked how he was. Looking at his beloved, who was fooling around, he said, a little bitterly, but overall it was bearable. Feeling his shoulder, Ray said that it really did ease the pain, but then he realized that his shoulder no longer hurt. Helen asked why he hit her like that. It was just a painkiller, not a full-fledged medicine, and the effect lasted about a day. Lola lovingly praised what a genius their madam was and wanted to hug or kiss her. Eleanor tried to ignore the love gusts, but she was glad it worked anyway. Byrne noticed that she studied potion making every day, and finally she succeeded. Yes, all the efforts paid off. Then Eleanor asked Keller if he was also happy, and after thinking about it, the boy exclaimed that he was also happy. A few days later, Circa arrived at Venua's mansion, coming to repay her for her kindness and thanking her for the kind way he had been received. Eleanor asked him not to think about it. She even received a great gift and asked if he said he wanted to repay her. Of course, Circa answered. He should thank her for her kindness. Then Eleanor asked if he could do her a favor. Circa listened, and Helen wanted to spread what she had created through the Rondia Trade Guild. The man hesitated. After apologizing, he asked what kind of product it was, and then Marie handed Helen a beam, which she passed to Cirque. The man thought that since a child had done it, it was unlikely that there was anything special there, maybe candy, and after receiving the bottle, he asked what it was. And Eleanor replied, "Painkiller made with magic. The effect is guaranteed," asking if he wanted to try it himself. Circa asked in horror, "A magic potion? So she is a magician. And she did it herself," he tried to comprehend, looking first at the jar, then at Helen. No wonder he was shocked, Eleanor thought. After all, it was a magic potion in tablet form. The man asked if she would mind if he checked the effect immediately, and Helen did not. His repeated words about her making the potion herself irritated her, but if the guild master himself checked, the effect could be confirmed for sure. When Circa slightly cut his finger, Eleanor handed him a pill and suggested he try it. Although it was a fairly small wound, as soon as the man ate the medicine, he was very surprised. His admiration knew no bounds, and he exclaimed to Madame that it was incredible. Her skills were impressive. And although he was being a bit dramatic, Eleanor asked if he was ready to sell it now, by which time Kel had also come up. "Of course," exclaimed the guildmaster. "Of course it's great. They put a very high price on this medicine." But Helen wanted it not to be too expensive. This medicine is more needed by common people who cannot visit a doctor without problems. However, given the fast action, it was superior to standard high-level potions, but Helen insisted on her own. However, Circa tried to convince her that if the supply is limited, the price will naturally rise. But this was not a problem for Eleanor. As they were talking, the medicine was already being produced. Along with the potion, she created an automatic production device, the first magical device she ever made. Surprisingly, it worked well, but it was quite noisy, so she planned to make a slightly smaller version for sale than this one. Ideally, Circa said, its solid form would make it easier to transport. Then once he had finished his business in the capital, he could return here. But before that, Eleanor would like to know how much he can offer as a down payment. The man asked her in surprise what she meant, and the girl explained that Rondia was not the only guild visiting these lands. Laughing, she said she would decide based on the deposit. Circa thought, his instincts sharpened. They told him that anyone would be a fool to miss such an opportunity, and said that he would give as much as she asked. Eleanor tensed up and thoughtfully handed him a paper, saying that she would accept this as a deposit and prepayment for the first batch. After reading the document, Cirque noted that it was a fairly large advance, but the production costs were low, so it was practically robbery. She explained that if the goods were sold at a price different from that stated in the contract, he would not receive the second batch. The girl extended her hand. Even at that age, she was very stubborn, and Cirque was ashamed that he doubted her even for a second. And so he shook her hand and said that if this deal was successful, he hoped that she would trust them with future medicines. Eleanor took note and asked if he would like to personally check them again when the time came. Circa thoughtfully said that he would send someone else to them when suddenly Keller irritably ordered not to touch her hand. Eleanor awkwardly told her husband that it was a simple handshake. Circa immediately raised his hands, and Keller showed his displeasure with his whole appearance. Frightened, Circa said that she was already leaving, and thanking him for the hospitality, immediately left. But anyway, it was great, Eleanor rejoiced. He offered a large deposit and immediately agreed to the deal. Happily hugging Keller, the girl said that he didn't need to worry about anything. She would make him rich. Eleanor was so happy that she couldn't hold back her emotions and kissed Keller on the cheek, and he smiled happily, hugging his wife in return. One day, Eleanor was riding a horse. Lady Lola praised Madame, saying that she had talent. At this rate, she could take part in the races, and the girl sheepishly asked Lady Lola not to exaggerate. Keller was watching her from the side, and Eleanor, noticing his gaze on her, offered him a ride together. The boy looked at Eleanor uncertainly, but exhaled sadly and shook his head, declining the offer. One day Keller will find himself on the battlefield, and what will he do then if he is so afraid of horses? She thought that she needed to master this skill faster, so that she could teach him too, when suddenly the lady was called out. Norman, the butler, ran across the entire garden, worriedly reporting that there was a problem. As the man ran up, Lady Lola helped Eleanor off her horse, and he announced that the Count of Bologna had arrived. Count Bologna, Eleanor tried to remember. Was he the same worthless uncle who hated Keller? The Count of Bologna, unlike the former Duke, was a complete scoundrel. Even in childhood he had given himself over to the worst vices. Drugs, gambling, and much more. He collected all this in himself, and before the Duke died he strictly ordered Norman to ensure that the Duchy of Manhwa would never fall into the hands of the Count of Bologna. That is why they were so actively looking for the young master. And Norman was afraid that the vile man would try to intimidate the young master and mistress. The man thought about this as he watched the little children walking away to meet the Count. The Count sat and waited. There was complete chaos here. How could the estate have turned into such a squalor? What this brat does with governance, appear out of nowhere and call himself the heir, it works. A servant's illegitimate child as an heir is absurd. When his brother died, he thought the duchy would go to him. If he had received this vast, pure land, he would have become an absolute aristocrat whom no one could forget. And now this bastard dared to take his estate, the Count thought as Eleanor and Keller entered the room. Coming closer, Eleanor curtsied and said that she was glad to meet him, the Count of Bologna. The Count turned away and chuckled, thinking that on his estate, on land that belonged to him, these brats were playing adults. Keller, also modestly, nervously fiddling with his hands, greeted Count Bologna, saying that he was glad to meet him. Count Bologna looked at the children with a haughty and contemptuous look, full of disgust for the vile scum. Sitting down opposite the man, and while the servants poured tea, Eleanor asked what brought him to the Manhwa estate. "What brought him here?" the Count asked haughtily. This must be his house, so what reason was needed to come here? There was no response to this indignation, which made the man even more irritated. Trembling with anger, he called the children arrogant brats and asked if they knew what kind of estate it was so they could act like owners. Helen explained that the young gentleman had received official approval from the imperial family, and the Count had ordered that he not be made laugh. And he declared that from next year they should send part of their income to the county of Bologna. Then he would put in a good word with the vassals. Now his true motive became clear, Eleanor thought, rolling her eyes and sighing heavily. And, childishly tilting her head in surprise, she asked why they should, and Keller repeated after her. Putting the cup on the table, the girl told Count Bologna that there was no point in throwing tantrums like a child over nonsense. If he insisted, they would file an official petition to the imperial court, which frightened the Count. He was already under the surveillance of the emperor and the nobility for objecting to the decision about the heir. He thought about going to the capital to fix it, but if the petition went to court, he would lose all support. She heard that he had stopped here on his way to the capital and asked why he didn't take the petition with him. The Count shouted at her, "How dare she?" But then Keller stood up for the lady and, frowning and raising his voice, told him not to shout at the lady. The Count was astonished by such impudent behavior and swung at the dirty little rascal, asking how dare he. But at that moment, the girl shielded Kell with herself and said, "Enough." As the Duchess of Manhwa and the acting lord, she officially banished him. "What?" the man asked irritably, clenching his fists. "Is driving her away?" And smiling, he asked, "How dare she?" Eleanor explained that he had threatened the young master and that this was unforgivable, and then called Norman. She said that Count Bologna had urgent business, and he had to leave immediately, and asked him to make sure that he left. And turning to the Count, she asked whether he would leave on his own, or whether she should ask the knights to take him out. The man clenched his teeth. The milk hadn't yet dried on their lips, he thought, clenching his fists and pushing Norman in the shoulder, ordering him to get out of the way. Pig, sighing loudly and discontentedly, stamping his heels, walked away, and Norman, offended, felt his shoulder as he watched him go. As he left, he thought that he should have left as soon as he saw their faces. To intimidate him like that, they would pay dearly for their arrogance. A few days later, Eleanor went to check the territories. She should have done this a long time ago, but she was busy. There were still several places to visit. She realized this only when Count Bologna spoke about it. The vast border regions of the Duchy of Manhwa were controlled by vassals who ruled over their own small parts. Now that the emperor had officially recognized Keller as his heir, the vassals had to come and pay their respects to the new duke. However, Eleanor did not see a single face. Perhaps they did not want to accept that the heir was an illegitimate child. But still, couldn't they show a little respect? Not a single letter of greeting, the arrogant degenerates. In the novel, these employees only began to behave friendly after Keller returned from the war with great glory. Eleanor even remembered the scene where the princess gave all the serving vassals a good scolding. And in the original story, unfortunately, Eleanor was plotting with them. The girl had nothing to say to this, even if she does not live the same way as in the original. Looking at the surprised Keller, she again turned her gaze to the window. She felt somehow uneasy. As she approached the vassals' lands, Eleanor noticed how beautiful the city was. She also drew Keller's attention to this and asked if it was really beautiful. Yes, he answered modestly. Getting out of the carriage, Eleanor told Keller that she would go and look around, and if it was difficult to drive, he should tell her. The boy who had to mount the horse answered hesitantly and modestly, "Okay." Riding her horse with Keller, Eleanor waved her hand and drew the boy's attention to his lands. Not hearing a response from Keller, Eleanor realized that he did not yet fully understand what this meant, and she explained that these lands were once conquered during a war by a loyal duke, his distant ancestor. So these are the properties that he must manage and must protect the people living here. His duty was to provide these people with a good life and not let them starve. Keller understood it. Smiling slightly, Eleanor reached out and gently stroked Keller's head. The boy melted from this display of love, and the girl wondered why they ran the household like that. Norman asked the lady what she was thinking so deeply about, and she asked him about how the farm was run. Norman replied that they divided the land into 3 parts and alternated between sowing wheat and barley, leaving the remaining plots free. She asked if soil nutrition was the reason why the land remained unoccupied, and Norman confirmed that she was right. He asked the lady why she was asking, and she was wondering why they didn't plant turnips or clover, which would replenish the soil's nutrient reserves. Whether it's because farming methods aren't evolving, or perhaps they've never invested in research in this area. Perhaps because the nobles don't care about the lives of farmers, and Helen said he would be a good ruler. Unlike the others, she would follow this thoroughly, Eleanor thought with a broad smile. Within a few months of introducing the new method of farming using clover and turnips, the following year's crop began to grow. And the life of farmers stabilized, of course. Tax revenues increased, and many people returned to the territory. Thus, several seasons passed, and upon receiving the royal command, Keller had only 1 year left. Another strange plant had grown on the territory, the maid reported to the grown-up Eleanor. It was unusual, and Eleanor agreed with this. Strange plants had appeared in the greenhouse lately. There are even some that Anna, their respect for plants, does not know about. Oddly enough, she remembered some plants from her past life. But she didn't know what it was. Anna asked whether she should dig it up with the roots next time. "That's right," Helen answered, stretching. She would check on him later. She needed to rest a little. She probably overdid it with the examination. Her eyes hurt. In addition to the painkiller, she also took blood-stopping drugs. As well as ointments and other remedies in preparation for the war that Keller would go to, her medicines worked faster than others. Keller had been training since he began training with the Knights of the Order and had increased his training hours. Eleanor asked Anna to prepare a meal so that they could eat when he returned from training. To be honest, Eleanor wanted to go and see Keller, but from that day on, she was not allowed to come. 3 years ago, Keller decisively informed the lady that he would train with Baron. And he also said that she no longer needed to come and watch him, which was a shock for the girl. But she did not contradict Keller's wishes, and said that then she would just watch today. She didn't understand why this was happening, whether she was interfering, but plunging into her memories now, she finally understood. Come to think of it, when Keller first used magic items, she was shocked. And he was very sweet before. He was already quite grown up, and Helen thought that he was no longer afraid of Byrne. I wonder if this is how it feels when you let your child go to school alone for the first time, she thought with a smile. In the newspaper, Eleanor read that the temple had finally entered the war by uniting with the emperor. The Heklos Empire, located in the western part of the continent of Phria, is the largest empire on the continent, and the war that is about to break out has begun on the eastern continent in the Urta Empire. They took pleasure in hunting down people who rejected the Ticker religion, which was believed by most of the continent's inhabitants. And one after another they invaded small neighboring countries, then they declared that they would return the mana to their god, the Emperor. They began to indiscriminately kill priests and magicians, calling them heretics, and it was in this war that Keller would reveal his potential. Marie turned to the lady cautiously and asked why she looked so tense. "Nothing," Eleanor answered awkwardly, and the girl reported that she had heard that another priest had been kidnapped. Sighing, she asked how long these savages would continue this. "And don't tell," Eleanor answered. No matter how wildly the Urta Empire behaved, if only the Empire and the Great Temple cooperated, then Keller would not have been taken away at such an early age. At first glance, the Empire and the Temple seemed to be allies. But in reality, their relations were far from good. The Emperor wanted a war that would even reach the western borders. But the Temple did not like to carry out the orders of the Empire, and only categorically continued to speak out against the war. However, the Urtans killed the mages and priests more and more often, and the Imperial Court and the Temple finally united. But as soon as the war officially began, internal strife flared up again due to the struggle for political power between the palace and the Temple. And it was in this chaotic alliance that Keller led the war to victory. What pathetic little people, Eleanor thought. But then, Keller called out to his mistress returning from training and asking how long she had been waiting. "Not really," answered Helen, getting up. Perhaps it was because of the newspaper she had read. However, this was becoming a reality, because Keller would soon leave, but now she was calling him to eat. But Eleanor never stopped asking for their Keller to return home safely. Everything was inefficient, there were too many offices, so why did the former dukes create separate libraries? While searching for documents, she found a book with the history of the Duchy of Manhwa. Perhaps there would be something useful in it for Keller. She read that the first duke used an artifact imbued with ancient power to gain a special ability. This brooch was exactly the same as the one on the portrait of the first duke that she had seen earlier, so it was an artifact. It was supposed to be passed down, but she never saw it. Perhaps the former duke sold it. But just in case, Eleanor still decided to look for the presence of hidden mechanisms or something similar. Suddenly, she noticed the table and remembered that she had once found gold coins under the table. And so she squatted down and decided to check this place just in case, and she was right. She was really here, and as she dug out the hiding place with a crowbar, she thought that she needed to check under every table in every office. All in order to check if there was a wooden compartment, and now she finally found the hidden chest. However, when Eleanor opened it, she discovered gold and jewelry, as well as a dummy artifact. Damn, she thought. It must be a stone that was emitting a crimson glow, right? The artifact couldn't be hidden so easily, she breathed out. But suddenly, a system window that had not appeared for so long flashed in front of Eleanor, asking if she wanted to use the undisclosed item. She remembered with horror that the same message had popped up when she died, so why was it appearing now? What kind of name is this fading life, and what is this unknown object? Could they please explain in more detail? What should she do? Should she press it? Because just like that time the countdown has started, but what if something goes wrong? Helen didn't know what was going to happen, or if she should really press it, but the seconds kept passing, increasing her anxiety. Then she finally read what was written, that it was for a vanishing life, and then she extended her trembling hand forward. She definitely had to at least try, and then she pressed the treasured button. Apply. The sudden light blinded her. A system notification gave her the ability to use a hidden item, the phoenix feather. And when Eleanor finally opened her eyes, she discovered that the brooch on her hand had become as if new. Looking happily at the brooch, she said that it would be very useful when Keller went to war. Thank God, Eleanor sighed with relief, pressing the brooch to her cheek. She was simply very happy. That same night they slept together as usual, but Keller could not sleep and tossed and turned for a long time. Adults no longer frightened him as much as before, but as long as the lady was next to him, he was not afraid of anything. However, lately she has been saying strange things, that he should protect the people if something happens to the Empire. Stroking his head, she said that he was capable of anything, so he should never be afraid. Eleanor knew that he could handle it perfectly well on his own. Then the boy again turned his head towards the lady. Squeezing her hand, Keller wondered why she kept talking as if they would break up. It was scary. Was the lady really going to leave him? This could not be, and he asked not to let him be separated from the lady. But another year passed, and the Norman called out to his masters, reporting the news Eleanor had been waiting for. The day came when Keller was called to the front. Norman told the children that the imperial decree had arrived. And now, finally, it has come. Duke Venua will personally lead his soldiers with the god Tyverk to war against the empire of Heklos. Even though Eleanor knew this day would come, she still felt this way, and Keller must be even more shocked. She called out to Keller to console him, but then the boy himself, crying, said that he did not want to go and asked not to force him. Such a pitiful look made it difficult for Eleanor to contain her emotions. She was also in pain, and so she hugged Keller tightly and said that she would wait for his return. So she begged him to go and return safely, while bitter tears flowed from Keller's eyes. Time, as always, passed monstrously quickly, and then the day of departure arrived. Everyone was standing on the street, seeing Kell off. Just a few days ago, he cried so much. He remembered not to show weakness in front of the staff and did not cry now. Eleanor turned to Keller and placed the brooch in his hands, asking him to take it, saying that it would protect him. She also asked him not to get hurt or sick, and Keller promised this, and his cheeks turned slightly red. Eleanor said that she would write to him and asked him to take care of himself. Keller asked the same from her, and she promised. Byrne and Marie watched them sadly, and then Eleanor handed Kell a letter and asked him to read it later. After this, the girl turned to Sir Byrne and asked him to take care of the Duke, and the man asked the lady not to worry. They promised to return soon, and Helen hoped that this was so, even though she knew that the war would last 10 years. Just getting to the Khaitan Mountains where the fighting is taking place will take a long time, and the Urta Kingdom is no easy opponent. Keller will return as a respectable duke, hardened by war, and she is ready to do everything for him, even if it means leaving the duchy without regret to return and live happily ever after with the princess who is destined to be his heroine. Several months passed, and although the cold winter came to an end, a warm spring arrived. Since the master left, the lady had been completely immersed in studying potions, as if trying to occupy herself with something to distract herself from her thoughts. Not only she, Anna, but everyone in the estate felt sorry for her, but they could only stay close to her. Closing the book, Eleanor sighed heavily and thought, at least fortunately, that the war was waged together with the temple. Priests and holy knights could use healing magic, so if Keller was injured, they should heal him. On the other hand, she was lucky that she found these wild ginseng roots and created new medicines. I'll have to send Keller a bunch of those red pills, even though they'll be sold by the Rondia Cirque Trading Guild. But since it is wartime, producing better medicines will help not only Keller, but all the inhabitants of this territory. And perhaps she should start other projects to develop the territory, and asked Norman for a report on the current territory. One interesting piece of news was that the population had increased significantly from its previous level. And thanks to this, the area is starting to look more vibrant, but some areas are still struggling with poverty. They still had a long way to go, but then Eleanor read words of gratitude in the documents. And she asked if the shelter Keller was in the slums, and Norman replied that it was. The shelter where Keller lived bordered the lands of Baron Bendos. The girl thought about this. She remembered how Keller had a nightmare about that shelter that night, and he asked for forgiveness, said that he was sorry. Then she consoled him. But now she was thinking, since Bron Bendos, the vassal of the duchy, was sent to war with Keller, then technically these slums were part of the Duke's territory, she asked, and Norman confirmed it. Eleanor's eyes lit up at the thought of the plan. The grin changed to a smile, and she asked for the carriage to be prepared. The time has come. They had the nerve to stay here, even after bullying Keller. Until now, she had kept silent out of respect for Baron Bendos, but today she was determined to correct all that. Suddenly, a young knight about her age called out to the lady and shyly asked her to take the bouquet. Eleanor turned around in surprise and looked at the knight, good-naturedly accepting his gift. However, as soon as the girl's gaze fell on the bouquet collected for her, recent memories surfaced in her thoughts. One day, Keller collected a bouquet of yellow flowers for his mistress in exactly the same way and presented it to her with a smile. Looking at the bouquet in her hands, Eleanor's face softened and she wondered what Keller was doing now. But after a while, she arrived at the shelter and realized that the place was completely abandoned. She didn't understand how they could keep children here, how a drunk man came out to them and asked if they wanted to adopt a child. "That's right," she answered the man, scratching his belly. "First, she would like to see these children. She looked like a noblewoman from a rich house, so why did she come to the slums to take a child?" However, it really was none of his business, and after thinking for a moment, he invited everyone to follow him. As soon as the company was inside, everyone's face twisted in horror, and Norman and the knight even looked away. Norman told the lady that things had become even worse here than when he came for the master. Eleanor asked why the children were so thin. The man told the lady that these were slums. It would be strange if they were not like that. These words touched Eleanor, and she ordered to call the manager. He noticed her nervousness and asked her to wait a minute. After a while, a female voice thanked Eleanor for the journey she had made. A woman dressed in luxurious clothes, smiling at the frowning Eleanor, introduced herself as the manager of this shelter. She asked if she was looking for a specific child, a boy, a girl, and then Helen started talking about the events of 6 years ago. That there should have been a very small, thin boy with black stripes and pink eyes. Does she remember him? The manager replied that there were too many to say for sure, but did that mean that so many children were locked up and abused? The manager didn't even know what rumors she had heard, but perhaps she was confusing them with another shelter. However, Eleanor, showing a drawing of 2 faces of the managers, exclaimed that having seen this, they would not be able to deny it. The man and woman looked at the drawing in bewilderment, and the manager asked the lady if she was joking. Eleanor asked them both seriously, showing them a drawing that exactly depicted them, if it looked like she was joking. She pointed at the man, and the knight threatened him with his sword, and Helen asked if it was he, the one who was Keller's most. The trembling manager said that he didn't even know who it was, and then the girl explained that the one they had mocked was now the owner of this land. "What?" the shelter manager asked anxiously, but then Marie's voice was heard behind her, informing the lady of their arrival. And the next moment, knights burst into the orphanage and twisted the hands of the managers behind their backs. The woman screamed and asked what they were doing, who they thought they were, and how dare they touch her. Eleanor asked happily, and smiling broadly, explained that she was the current owner of these lands. The delegation immediately calmed down, but still could not come to terms with what was happening, and Eleanor ordered them to be taken away. When everyone went out to see the criminals off, Marie asked the lady what they should do with these children. And thinking, Eleanor smiled and said that they would build a new orphanage and ordered that all the children be sent there. Eleanor thanked Sir Theodore for accompanying her, and the man smiled and said that it was his duty. The girl also turned to Norman and said that from that moment on, there would be no more slums on their land. She will take full responsibility for development until Keller returns. Tears welled up in the butler's eyes. Of course, it was for Keller's sake, but she also needed to secure this land to protect her future after the divorce. This land is very dear to her, so even after the divorce, she does not want to leave it. In any case, she finally got her revenge. She hoped that Keller was also happy, and at that time the boy, sitting by the fire, was reading the very letter left by Eleanor. He thought that no matter how scared he was and how much he missed his mistress, he could not show weakness. And wiping away tears, clenching his hand into a fist, he realized that, as she said, he had to be strong. In a dark forest where there was a group of knights, but then they were attacked by goblins. The older knights fought back fearlessly while Keller stood behind them, trembling. The boy was very uneasy after all. This was the first time he saw monsters. He was scared, but at that moment Sir Byrne lost sight of the goblin and he rushed straight at Keller. The man froze in fear, worried about the young master when the monster jumped at him, swinging. However, the young duke was not afraid at the moment of the attack. He took a step forward and with a precise blow cut the goblin into 2 parts. Sir Byrne saw all this, saw the gentleman's confident gaze, but asked with concern if he was okay. He jumped off his horse to meet Keller, and the boy, putting away his sword, replied that everything was fine. And then he ordered the knights to line up and march out in order to pass through this forest faster. Rubbing the sword in his wrist, the pain from the injury he had received earlier was felt, and he wrinkled his face. Byrne entered the Duke's chamber and asked if he was really okay, and he answered again that everything was fine. The man handed the boy some painkillers from Lady Eleanor and asked if he should call a priest if it hurt too much. But Keller only agreed to the mistress's medicine and, while eating the pill, he thought that he was completely out of order. Still, this was the first time he had seen blood since the orphanage, but still, he had to. He said that he would practice fencing. This frightened Byrne very much, and he tried to dissuade the gentleman, but it didn't work. Despite Byrne's entreaties, Keller went out into the street. His Majesty had gone too far in sending such a youth to command the knights. People thought about Keller. Didn't the Emperor send him to certain death? After all, he probably wanted to hand everything over to the Count of Bologna. There were even rumors that the Emperor and the Count of Bologna had made a deal, and Keller was too weak and wanted to become stronger. He wanted to become strong enough to protect everyone, but then an unknown voice asked Keller Venua if he was looking for strength. But a couple of minutes ago, the boy kept thinking that right now he wanted to return to his wife. He remembered her words about him not daring to bow his head because he was the proud ruler of this land. He would have continued to practice diligently with the sword, but then Byrne came and said that it was time to rest. If Keller tried too hard, he would simply collapse, but the boy did not listen to him. Byrne asked not to rush. The young master was still young. Several years would pass before he became a stronger knight. Keller froze in thought. Was he really thinking that? Was he really too tired and wanted to become stronger? Suddenly, Keller heard that unknown voice calling him by name, and he asked in surprise if it was Byrne who had called him. No, Byrne answered warily, and asked if something was wrong, and Keller decided that he had simply misheard. That same night, as the boy fell asleep, he remembered what the knights had said while they were in the county. One of them grinned and said that ghosts inhabited the battlefield, and Byrne ordered his comrade to stop making fun of the young master. Then the knight apologized, but Keller was frightened by the fact that the rumors still existed, and also by the voice that he had heard earlier. Maybe it's just a stupid story, he thought tremblingly. He wanted to become so strong that he wouldn't be afraid of ghosts, voices, and everything else. When the same unknown voice suddenly asked Duke Venois if he wanted power, Keller jumped out of bed in horror. Could it be that this voice came from the brooch? The voice addressed the heir of Venois and asked him to answer if he could hear his voice. The voice from the brooch promised to give the heir to the duchy such power that he would not be afraid of anyone. Kell began to examine the brooch. The boy asked the voice who he was, and the brooch was glad that the boy finally heard him. The voice asked where the pink-haired girl who gave him life was, and Keller asked if he meant his wife. His wife? Asked the brooch. No matter, he said that the girl saved him when he almost disappeared. The voice asked why he had this brooch. Keller replied that she gave it to him. The brooch was indignant. Did she really not know who he was? Did she just give it away? But still, the voice thought he was the true heir. Kell asked what he was talking about. The voice told him that long ago he had chosen the first Venua and generously shared his power with the one who had made a pact with him. So, will he also make a contract with him? Doesn't he need strength? Keller, clutching the blanket, answered uncertainly. He does. Then the voice suggested doing it immediately, but Kell interrupted and said that his wife said not to trust strangers so easily. The voice was discouraged, and the next day did not give up trying to make a deal with the boy. But Keller refused, and then the voice exclaimed, asking why. He said that he wanted to become stronger and was not seriously doing this. The voice asked him if he knew how amazing he was, and said many other things, irritating Keller. He wished the brooch would shut up, but from that day on the brooch talked to him endlessly, and everyone around him noticed how angry Keller walked. Finally, giving in to this endless chatter, Keller asked what would happen if he made a deal. The voice became inspired and said that Venua's blood could use natural mana if he increased that power and gave it to him. Kell sensed a catch and said it sounded like he was the only one losing here. Wrong, the voice answered anxiously. If he becomes strong, then so will he, especially if he becomes a sword master. And then he will receive the power to remove the seal, restore his full form, and release everything he has. He will be the strongest ally, and asked how he feels about it. Is it tempting? Is he not interested in who he is? He may have been interested in his name and offered to make a deal, but Keller categorically replied that he didn't care. The voice worriedly thought that he should have agreed already, but seriously rejected it because his wife said so, and it was true. The last phrase gave the voice an idea, and it asked the gentleman if he wanted to return to his wife. Hearing the question, Keller shuddered, and after a pause answered that he wanted to return to her, even a day earlier. And then the brooch assured the boy that the deal was his best way out. If he were freed, the war would end in the blink of an eye. Keller became interested in this, and the voice assured him that he had no need to lie. Otherwise, he would remain here if they did not make a deal. Besides, even being a full-fledged spirit, he will be attached to it, the voice from the brooch said. But whether he was ready to make a deal, the boy thought, and asked if he would provide it in writing. The spirit asked in surprise where he learned this. Keller answered, obviously, from his wife. As a result, they concluded a written agreement. Now Keller was in business, and the spirit breathed a sigh of relief. The brooch, floating on the hand of the heir of Venua, was illuminated by a bright light and presented itself as Ivrit, the spirit of the King of Fire. and now he, Keller Venua, had to pronounce his name, and the boy said that he was making a deal with the Hebrew. As soon as the deal was made, waves of light rushed into Keller's hand, illuminating the entire chamber with a bright light. The next moment, maroon wings appeared from the light, feathers flew apart, and ears became visible. Is this the spirit of the king? Looking at the small animal with golden eyes that appeared before him, Keller asked who it was. The creature raised its paw and joyfully exclaimed that he was none other than the king of spirits, Lord Hebrew. Keller felt cheated, but Hebrew explained that he looked like that now because he didn't have enough strength. He held a small animal in his hands, and Hebrew said that by absorbing its mana, he would become more and more majestic. Keller sighed heavily with mixed feelings, thinking maybe he could trust him. Oh, how he missed his mistress. 4 years had passed. Eleanor spent time with the children from the orphanage, but Marie informed them that it was time for them to go. It turned out that it was already so late that Helen asked the servants to continue in the carriage, promising to come soon. As she was about to say goodbye to the children, Eleanor turned around, but then a girl called out to her and asked her to take the flowers. The girl squatted down and, stroking the baby on the head, thanked her for the gift and also asked her to take care of herself. Eleanor walked towards the carriage, enjoying the scent of the flower she had been given, when she suddenly felt something was wrong. Pain shot through her wrist and the girl dropped the flower, looking worriedly at her hand. In fear, she wondered why this had happened now, a disease that turned the body into stone. In the original story, Eleanor attempted to poison the princess with a potion that would turn her body into stone. And as punishment, she was struck with an incurable disease with the same symptoms and died. In Romanen, the symptoms only showed up when Keller returned and she was banished, so why now? Why, Eleanor thought, trembling with anxiety, pressing her hand to her chest. What if she died before Keller returned? And from that day on, she immediately began to look for a cure, asking Cirque to buy all the herbs that exist in the world. She collected and studied all the books about herbs. The girl consoled herself, thinking that she would quickly find a cure. However, day after day passed, and the medicine still could not be found. There was no strength left, and bitter tears dripped onto the table. But Eleanor could not come to terms with such a fate, and with a huge burden on her soul, she wiped away her tears. She consoled herself with the thought that she would definitely find a cure, and then she would greet Keller with hugs and a smile. Even when she was simply walking in the garden, her thoughts were occupied with searching for herbs to treat an incurable disease. Anna noticed that the lady didn't look well and asked if she was okay. She was okay, she replied with a forced smile. The girl thanked the maid for her concern, and she herself, sighing heavily, looked at her wrist. The disease gradually progressed. 2 years have passed since its onset, and she still has not found a cure. Eleanor was worried that she would die just like the real Helen, but suddenly something caught her eye. She asked Anna what it was, and she replied that it was the herb she had said she wanted to examine separately. Besides, it was constantly growing, so she periodically collects and saves it, Anna reported. Helen thought she had seen it when she was researching red ginseng, but she had never studied it, so she asked Anna to bring everything she had collected. This burgundy clover was not in any book. Perhaps it will lead to a cure. Having created the potion, Eleanor poured it into cups as tea and decided to start with green tea brewed from the stem. Looking at her reflection in the cup, she worriedly hoped that it would work and drank the medicine. After the glass was empty, Eleanor froze, giving the medicine time to take effect. However, as expected, nothing happened, she thought with a grin, as suddenly her finger moved. Finally, she thought with enthusiasm, the paralysis was still there, but the condition had clearly improved. She had found a cure. Who knew it was so close, and if so, she should drink some red leaf tea too. It was more concentrated than the stems, so the effect should be better, although it looked scary. It was a bit scary, but Eleanor smiled and thought that as long as it worked, there was nothing to worry about. But as soon as the drops of medicinal tea hit her throat, Eleanor fell off the chair, unable to breathe. When her breathing returned to normal, Helen saw blood on her palm, and her hand trembled with fear. She placed her diseased hand on the floor. The poison test was clean. Maybe it was a toxin that was not detected. Eleanor was thinking about this, but suddenly realized that she could feel the fingers of her left hand again. The stem had already relieved almost all of her paralysis symptoms, but after drinking tea from the leaves, she felt all of her fingers. However, she was worried about coughing up blood, but this was the best result she had seen, and since it was not painful, it was worth just observing. But if she coughs up blood like this every time she drinks red tea, then everyone will definitely be alarmed. And so Eleanor decided to keep it all a secret. But in any case, she could now sleep soundly knowing that there was a cure for paralysis. And then she decided to hide the blood-stained handkerchief in a chest of drawers, thinking that no one would find it that way. After she found the antidote to her illness, her mood improved and even her body condition improved. Humming a tune to herself, Eleanor asked Anna to bring the plants they had planted earlier. The maids Anna and Marie were glad that their mistress had regained her spirits and felt relieved by this. And all because the girls noticed that Helen looked depressed for some time, and it worried them. But Marie was glad that she felt better, and Helen asked Anna to do the cleaning later. While cleaning, Anna arrived in Eleanor's room and noticed the edge of a piece of fabric peeking out of a dresser drawer. She immediately realized that the lady had forgotten her handkerchief again and decided to bring it to her. However, when she opened the box, she was horrified to discover that the handkerchief was stained with her mistress's blood. If the army was not careful, their forces could be destroyed, and the knights suggested that the Lord think more carefully about the plan. However, Keller was serious and said that there was no time to think, announcing that they would attack the kingdom of Urta tomorrow night. The man wanted to put an end to this damn war. He was usually calm to a frightening degree. And now his subordinates were frightened by his sudden change. Byrne asked the master to think again. And another asked the commander if he believed the words of that woman. The princess stood modestly behind their backs. Keller turned to look at her and narrowed his eyes in thought. A little earlier, he had been thinking about how the war was dragging on much longer than expected. The kingdom of Urta, aiming to create a great empire of Heklos on the western continent, destroyed the kingdom of Dawei. This was a key route to the west, and so they moved forward, the imperial court and temple recognizing the importance of the situation. They agreed to cooperate, but while the emperor insisted on a quick joint strike to crush Urtu, the temple advocated retreat and waited for the right moment. Urta's steel shield could only be pierced by divine power. Therefore, the Holy Knights had to take the front lines, but they did not carry out the High Priest's order and the war reached a stalemate. All because of the idiots and their struggle for power, Kelu needed to return to his wife. And then, coming out of the brooch, Ivrit asked to wait a little longer. He promised to end the war, and Kel angrily asked if he knew how many times he had already said it, how much longer he had to wait. Hebrew insisted on a few days, and then Keller impatiently fed him mana, telling him to eat and grow faster. Hebrew growled this was a forced mana consumption that wouldn't make him grow any faster. He had waited for years, and now he couldn't wait just a few days? Why was he so nervous today? Keller froze. He clenched his fist, remembering the knight's conversations about his wife cheating on one man, but no matter how arrogant he was, it still sucked. Another committed suicide, others received news, but there was no news from the Venway estate, although Helen promised to write. And so Keller was afraid that she had forgotten about him, because during all this time, he had not received a single letter. What if she married someone else? Ivrit was amazed that he was so afraid of this and sighed heavily. Holding her by the chest, he lamented that it was even worse. She could die. Ivrit noticed that he was already writing a whole novel. These words infuriated Keller, and so he told Ivrit to get out, because he was only causing noise. Hebrew returned back to the brooch with a teska and words about how he was nicer when he was smaller. Suddenly, out of the blue, Keller heard strange voices from above saying that the princess had escaped. And raising his head, he saw a girl flying towards him through the portal with an alarmed look. Keller watched the scene with his mouth open in surprise, while voices shouted in the background that the princess needed to be caught. Now she was saying that she really was the princess of the Dawei kingdom, and that the king of Urta was really coming to their castle tomorrow. She sadly reported that he said that he wanted to take her himself, because she was given to him. The knights looked at each other warily, and then Byrne asked how she opened the gate. And then the girl pointed to her bracelet and said that it was all thanks to him, that it was a memory of her mother. The people of Urta don't know about this ability, so they will continue to look for it, but then the girl burst into tears, remembering her mother. The knight felt sorry for the princess, only Keller was calm and exhaled and turned to Byrne. The man responded immediately, and then Kell ordered him to stay with the woman until tomorrow and keep an eye on her. Byrne, taken aback by this, said that if she was telling the truth, then they would have to change the plan. Keller, heading for the exit, asked if he really believed what she said. He was disappointed in him. Byrne apologized guiltily, and Kell angrily ordered that if there was no news by tomorrow, she should be killed, and the operation would proceed as planned. But be that as it may, now Keller has dealt with the people of the kingdom of Denev and sat on the throne in anticipation. Putting his hand under his chin, he thought that the woman's words were true. The king of Urta should return in the morning. But then a man entered the hall shouting, no one came to greet them. Had Denev's dogs gone crazy? Keller rose from his throne and, drawing his sword, told the king of Urta, Felix II, that he was late. The man froze. Pointing his finger at the stranger, he anxiously asked who he was. But then Keller swung his blade. Having cut the king down, the guy wiped the blood that was splashing from his body from his face and, looking at what he had done, ordered Ivrit to burn everything. The crimson flames engulfed the royal palace of Denev and all the enemies. Keller immediately led the knights and moved towards Urta. Everywhere he passed, flames flared up, the bright fire burning not only the enemies who stood in his way, but even the retreating troops, leaving no trace. Upon hearing this news, the imperial army and the holy knights joined Keller's troops. The holy knights looked in awe at Keller, who was destroying enemies together with the Red Wolf. Because it was the very embodiment of Tiberius that they worshipped, with Keller's victory the war ended and everyone rejoiced. The people and clergy of the empire also rejoiced, and the news of this spread far and wide. Even Eleanor learned of this news. Shocked, she read the newspaper, closed it, and thought, she clearly remembered that the war was supposed to last 10 years. But what could have happened? And in any case, Keller is returning. Apparently the time has come for her to leave the stage. Keller asked Heinz why he thought he should go to the capital. The man stood up and asked if this was not a chance to impress the imperial house or temple. After all, the commander even saved Princess Denev, and then Keller replied that then he had even less reason to go there. After that, he told Heinz to go, and then, pouting, he thought that his plans to see the capital had vanished. Keller wondered why he wanted to impress such people at all. He already knew what ridiculous rumors were going around about him. A few weeks ago, he captured and executed Urta's general, Ferdinand, and pursued Prince Zane to the northern seas. His tracking magic only worked if he remembered the person's face, which was a laughable excuse for failure. But the king was already dead, and the war ended with the general taken prisoner, and I would have liked for it all to end there. In the temple they claimed that the god Tiberius had shown his power, and they began to call him the child of the god, after which real madness began. When it was discovered that the princess's bracelet was a lost holy relic of the temple, she decided to give it away. And in the temple they began to praise her for this and went further, linking her with him, spreading absurd rumors. It's funny, so she gave a bracelet. And so what? Now they were talking about her being the emperor's niece, as if it was such a big deal. But on the territory he will no longer have to deal with these people. But what is more important, will his wife like him? Kel thought, looking in the mirror. Although he came back without a single scar on his face, I wonder how she has changed. Hebrew asked irritably if he could be quieter. He could hear everything he was thinking, and he was so noisy that he couldn't sleep. Keller asked what was wrong with his form, and Ivrit proudly replied that since he was filled with power, he could change his appearance. And he asked what he thought, was it really sweet? But Kel answered coldly, not at all, and this upset Hebrew. He noticed that he had been looking in the mirror for an hour now. It didn't suit him, so had what he said earlier really hurt him? Kel winced. Ivrit understood everything. He had changed a lot, and there was a greater chance that he would not be loved, but even looking in the mirror he would not change his appearance. Keller gripped the arm of the chair and coldly ordered Ivrit to shut up and go to bed, who cheerfully returned back to the brooch. Keller sighed heavily and thought, asking the lady not to hate him too much, even if he was too gloomy. At the same time, Eleanor came out onto the training ground and noticed how lively it was here today. Sir Theron assumed it was because Milady had returned, and the girl had replied that they would all be back soon, and he apparently wanted to see his brother. Theron regretted that he could not leave together then, but Eleanor said that he led the knights well. The guy asked if she really thought so. Helen answered, of course, all the knights only praised him and praised him. Theron was embarrassed. He said hesitantly that perhaps the Duke had grown up too, and Eleanor pursed her lips, assuming that was the case. Theron noticed that the lady's face changed, but then she said that it was time for her to go and, refusing his escort, quietly left. Feeling dejected, Eleanor collapsed on her bed as soon as she returned to her chambers and thought about the rumors that were circulating. The princess is the emperor's niece. Keller is a child of God or a fire spirit. She had never heard of anything like that before. Since when did this become part of history? Was she so fixated on the war that she forgot about everything else? 7 years have passed, but does Keller still remember her children often forget their childhood memories? Maybe that's why he never responded to her letters. If so, then perhaps the divorce will go smoothly. She would simply disappear from the estate, as if she had never existed. Helen hoped that he would allow her to live quietly and peacefully somewhere on the outskirts. A few days later, the maids, under Norman's direction, were tidying up the estate before the master's arrival. The other maids were preparing Madame Eleanor for her husband's arrival. Marie had braided her hair beautifully, but she thought it was too much. Marie didn't understand what she was talking about because she would see the master again after so much time. She had to give it her all. But then Norman interrupted the dialogue, telling the lady that it was time to leave, and she reluctantly said that she was already on her way. Eleanor felt a little awkward wearing clothes she had never worn before, she thought as she looked at herself. But she decided that if Keller hesitated, she would be the first to talk about divorce. He need not worry. She was already ready to divorce him. But then the lady was called out and knights led by Keller entered the main gate. Keller dismounted from his horse and quickly approached Eleanor, who looked at him in surprise, smiling brightly. After which he said tenderly, "My wife," and while Helen stood there in confusion, he hugged her tightly. Pressing his mistress to himself, he said with enthusiasm and trepidation that he missed her very much. The girl still touched the guy hesitantly, thinking that it was a little too much. The knights also watched this touching scene. They had never seen the commander like this. They didn't think he was capable of such affection. Heinz asked warily if it was the Duchess. Apparently she was close to the commander. Of course, his comrade answered him proudly. She practically raised him. But then Hein asked why she hadn't sent a single letter. David tensed up after this question and said irritably, warning Heinz in the future not to dare to be rude to the Duchess. He refused the Emperor's personal thanks and hurried to the estate, so Heinz expected something grand. But all that is here is some shameless woman. That princess, the Emperor's niece, would be much more worthy. And the Emperor wanted to bring them together, and the princess, it seemed, was not against it either. No matter how you look at it, she was the best choice. He just wants the commander who saved the Empire and their mercenaries to be truly happy. The only one who could melt his cold heart was the princess, he reasoned in all seriousness. It's not this woman, who may have squandered his fortune single-handedly, who is so annoying. The servants watched the reunited spouses with emotion and tears, thinking how poor their mistress was. They understood everything about their mistress's condition on the day when Anna found the bloody handkerchief, and could not hold back their tears. They had heard about the lady's incurable illness and imagined how she had suffered all this time because of it. The ladies were wailing about what to do with their mistress, but then Norman asked everyone to calm down. He rightly noted that tears would not help them, so they should try not to grieve in front of her. There had to be a reason why she kept all this a secret, so for now they had to be careful and not show it to her. After a long time of being held in her husband's arms, Eleanor asked to be released, and Keller gently did so, placing his hands on her shoulders. The girl modestly and in some sense sadly lowered her head, saying that he had been through a lot. Keller seemed to notice his wife's strange state and was about to ask her about it, but then they were interrupted. All the household came closer, crying. Marie sobbed, rejoicing that the master had returned safe and sound. Norman could now die without regret. Eleanor asked Norman to lead the knights to their quarters and tell them of the banquet that would take place in a few days. And then she turned to Keller and, holding out her hand to the boy, assuming that he was tired, called him to go inside and rest. But then Keller took Eleanor's hand in surprise, noticing how small her hand was in fact. Helen thought. It was his hand that had gotten bigger. He pressed his cheek against her hand and said that she seemed too small. Back then they seemed big and reliable to him, and so it was hard to believe that those same arms were hugging him now. Eleanor sheepishly took her hand back and, turning away, called for Keller to go inside quickly and rest. And Keller, seeing such a reaction, understood it as if his wife was not very happy to see him. And Eleanor, moving away from him a little, thought that this was bad. She was about to burst into tears. Her heart was beating hard. He had so many scars on his arms. He had been through so much, and she wanted to hug him and tell him he was doing a great job. But for some reason her heart was beating so hard, she was probably just very surprised. No need to make things up, she shouldn't forget her place. The room was still the same. Helen deliberately did not touch it much. She wanted him to see it as he remembered it. Keller said the estate looked wonderful and that the lady had done a lot in his absence. Eleanor was pleased with the compliment and wanted to show him everything she had done to protect his property. The girl told Keller to look around a bit while she prepared some warm water, but then the guy asked if she was going to bathe him. She said that married couples can take baths together. And approaching his mistress's face and looking into her eyes, he smiled and asked if she remembered this. Yes, that was it, the girl asked nervously, stretching out the sounds, and uncertainly answered that she remembered. And she herself thought with alarm, this was in childhood. She said this then, because she must explain it now. She began to explain the words she had said in childhood, but then Keller noticed her reaction and, embarrassed, moved away and said that he was joking. But seeing her in such a state, he became even more embarrassed. Eleanor looked at her husband and her face turned very red. Embarrassed, Eleanor ran away, saying that she would ask the servants to prepare the bath, and then Keller was able to exhale. It was strange to him, the wallpaper and the fireplace. Everything was just as he remembered, but only his lady seemed different. There was an unpleasant stabbing sensation in her chest. Maybe she really wasn't happy to see him, a terrible feeling. At dinner, they sat opposite each other, and Helen thought that when she gave orders to the servants, the words came out by themselves. It was as if she had been rehearsing, but now that they were alone, she didn't know how to act. Looking at Keller, she thought that the atmosphere had changed greatly, and the Duke himself seemed to be in similar thoughts. But then their eyes met. It seemed like the perfect moment for conversation, but then they both became embarrassed. The couple turned away from each other abruptly, and Eleanor wondered guiltily why she was like this. Later, Keller looked at her with sadness and thought that maybe the lady had found someone else while he was gone. She was already beautiful before he left, but now, as she grew older, she became even more dazzlingly beautiful. Remembering how sweetly she communicated with the knights and servants, he thought that the lady was very kind to everyone. Probably many fell in love with her. These thoughts did not give him peace. He squeezed the knife, but they were already married. After dinner, they set out together for the chambers, Helen saying that she had heard of his achievements on the battlefield. Nervously massaging her fingers, she also said that she was very proud of him, although she still felt awkward being around him. And after what was said, she asked him to go and rest, pointing with her finger and telling him what would happen in the next room. Keller tensed up and immediately asked why. Helen didn't quite understand what he meant, and then he repeated why she wanted to sleep separately. Eleanor thought it was because they were getting divorced soon, and he already had a princess. But suddenly, looking at the guy's upset face, the girl finally realized that the princess was not next to him. But how? She was sure that in the original he returned with the princess, and where is the princess? She wondered. All this time, Keller, who had been watching her, lowered his head and sadly said that married couples sleep together. The man reminded her that it was she who taught him this. Asking if this was true, Helen was at a loss for words. He guessed, knew that she didn't want to be with him, and said bitterly, "She's not happy that he came back." Helen exclaimed in shock that this was not so, but Keller was convinced that she had not looked happy all this time. Turning around, he walked into the room, offended, and Helen ran after him, saying that it was a misunderstanding. She asked if he knew how long she had been waiting for him, and the guy asked if she loved him more. Eleanor wanted to touch him, to tell him that it wasn't so, but for some reason it was so difficult, and she took her hands away from him. In an instant, she realized that he had noticed this, and his face was screaming about how much mental pain he was in. Helen made excuses, but then Keller asked if it was because he was not as nice as he used to be. Hearing this, the girl froze, and Keller, hugging himself, said that it was because he had grown too much. That's why she doesn't look happy. Eleanor's stunned expression was hard to put into words. Waving her hands excitedly, she said that this was not so, and explained that they simply had not seen each other for many years. When she first sent him away, he was still a child, and now he came back as such a handsome man. She's just a little bit uncomfortable, that's all. But it's not because she doesn't love him. He's dear to her. Darling, she wanted to say little brother, but that would have been too much, and Keller said he hadn't heard her. Dear, she repeated. She said that he was dear to her, and therefore she asked him to stop thinking like that. But here's the problem. Keller wanted her to still see that child in him. Imagine how happy she would be when she hugged him. He'll tell him he's cute, stroke his hair, and tell him he's a good boy. This is exactly the kind of reunion he imagined. Keller asked her not to avoid him, but Helen didn't understand why she should do that. She just needed to get used to it. He was still dear to her, and he couldn't even imagine how much she missed him. Keller was touched by Eleanor's words, but inside a sea of thoughts was still raging, and he asked the lady not to cry. He put his hand on her cheek and Eleanor pressed herself against him with a smile, saying that she really missed him. And also, she was very glad that he returned. The tears disappeared and a smile also appeared on Keller's face. They stood like that for a while longer, and then Eleanor said that she wanted to show him something. The girl took him to a wall that held many memories, and a lot of time had passed since that moment. Keller was silent. He felt the marks with his hands. Even after Keller left, Eleanor continued to measure her height alone. So, he noticed she measured her height back then. The girl happily replied that she was bored and did it for fun. So, she was already that tall back then. She always seemed so grown up and cool, even when she was younger. Keller had a rough idea of how tall he was at the time, trying him on against the wall, but then Helen remembered something. Taking up the brush, she said that she had been monitoring her growth until she was 16, but Keller did not remember what happened after that. Then Eleanor suggested that he write it down now and stood him against the wall, trying to reach the top of Kell's head. However, due to Eleanor's short stature, this was not possible, and then Keller offered to do it himself. The young man measured his height and made a mark with a pen. Eleanor noticed that Keller had really grown a lot, not expecting such a big difference. Keller asked the lady if she was really glad that he had returned, and Helen proudly answered, "Of course." "Honestly?" he asked, and Eleanor smiled sweetly and answered honestly she was very happy. And then Keller suggested something to her, and Eleanor, lying in bed next to Kell, wondered how it had come to this. Keller then asked Eleanor to put him to bed, as she had done before. The girl asked him about it again with alarm, and explained to Keller that she was going to sleep separately. However, Keller begged her very much to do it only today, and in the end, Helen gave in. Well, it was okay. They would just be together today. She wanted to ask him so many things when they would meet again. Ask him how he lived during these difficult times. He is a good guy, and at least today, let him sleep peacefully. When Keller woke up in the morning, he was confused and wondered what he was doing. He just wanted to hug her like that. But if he hugged her without permission, she might hate her, and so he pulled away with effort. Keller had to hold on. Looking at Eleanor, he thought that she looked beautiful even when she was sleeping and covered her up. The guy went into the bathroom and washed his face. Looking at himself in the mirror, he thought that he couldn't let Helen see his ugly side. But as soon as the guy was about to go back to bed, he saw Hebrew waiting for him on the pillow and asked where he was so early in the morning. He became angry and whispered to ask if he was leaving, and Everett replied that he was there to see him, and so he just came to see what the man who once saved his life looked like. Keller was infuriated by this and rudely told him to get lost. Everett was shocked that he forbade him to see his savior. But having collected another warning, he flew out the window saying that he was leaving, but not because he was afraid of him, but because he was going to leave anyway. After watching his companion leave, Keller snorted and returned to bed with his wife. It was not long before Keller fell asleep, and the hour of Eleanor's awakening arrived. And waking up, as soon as she saw his face, she shuddered out of habit, and then jumped up screaming. Eleanor didn't want to wear it, but Marie thought it was important. The dress looked absolutely gorgeous, but it was difficult for Helen to move in it. Despite this, Marie said that Mr. Keller was here, so she should look beautiful. The girl did not understand what this had to do with it. Come to think of it, even when Keller slept this morning, his skin was clear, maybe because he was the main character. Okay, she was more nervous thinking they might change clothes together, but Keller was tactful and walked out. Eleanor felt a little uneasy and thought that it was her fault that they did everything together as children. She should have told him that she would sleep in another room tonight. But then something caught Eleanor's attention, and turning to Marie, she asked what had happened to her. She seemed different today. Perhaps she had had a row with Sir Byrne. Marie wondered if it was really that obvious. They were always together whenever they had the opportunity, and when they were separated, she cried every day. They even had an emotional meeting yesterday, so did they really quarrel? Marie hesitated. She explained that it was not really a quarrel, not knowing what to say since she could not say that it was because of the lady. Worried and nervous, Marie told Eleanor that it was true. There was nothing serious and asked her not to worry. And she suggested that she was probably hungry, saying that she had already asked for food to be prepared for her. Helen thought that perhaps she really had imagined it all, and Marie thought that she needed to be careful and not show it. Now about the story that Marie couldn't tell, Byrne was worried about the gentleman's indifference because he wasn't like that when he was younger. True, Ohio was interested in Marie, and the knight confirmed this, saying that he was very naive and loving. Marie said, smiling, that if so, then perhaps their mistress could. But before she could finish speaking, Byrne interrupted her. He asked if she had heard of Princess Larissa of the Kingdom of Danev, who was the Emperor's niece. The knight confirmed this and said that he really hoped that she would be able to melt the master's heart. Marie was dumbfounded. It seemed to Byrne that she was also interested in him, and since the Emperor also wanted to bring them together, he hoped that they would be together. "What did he just say?" Marie asked him irritably. Byrne did not understand her, and the girl exclaimed that the master already had a mistress. There was a system of divorce in the Empire, and anyway, he replied, they were almost like brother and sister, and the lady probably had someone else. They got married when they were kids and didn't understand anything, so he just assumed they would get divorced and be like brother and sister. Marie was already seething with rage. She asked what he was talking about, but she had no idea that he was such a person. Byrne did not understand what he had done wrong, and Marie cried and screamed, wondering if he could even imagine how the lady had been waiting for him. Seeing the girl's tears, he jumped up from his seat and began to calm Marie down, saying that he was wrong and asked her not to cry. However, Marie did not tolerate such an attitude towards her mistress, and raising her hand, she slapped Byrne with all her might. The girl was literally shaking with anger and spoke through her anger as if she apparently didn't know him at all. Marie asked, disappointed and indignant, why then had she waited for someone like him, Byrne begged, and said that he had really made a mistake. But Marie didn't care how he could say such a thing about the lady. They just needed to finish everything that was between them. After all, the lady meant much more to her than he did. Marie realized that she did not understand people, because how could anyone even think like that? Their mistress was a child herself, but she raised her master as her own, constantly writing him letters and supplies on the battlefield. She was very worried, and also worked tirelessly, despite a serious illness, and still achieved prosperity for the territory. And how after that Byrne could talk about her like that, Marie thought in a rage that she would never forgive him. At the same time, Eleanor took Keller out of the estate to show him how the area had changed during his absence. While the young man was looking at everything, Eleanor asked what he thought of the city now after so much time. Enchanted by the sight, he said that from now on he should probably start calling her Sir. After all, he would never have improved it the way she did. Eleanor is truly an amazing person. She was pleased. But it was his land, so Helen thought it was wrong. Besides, he even went through a war to protect this land. But his mistress protected her too, Keller replied. It didn't matter that she was a substitute. They were husband and wife, so they shared everything, as she said. Helen had said this earlier to stop him being picky with his vegetables, but Kel actually remembered and used it now. Eleanor still flatly refused to share the lands and, insisting that he was the master here, they walked through the city. After looking at many beautiful places, they finally entered a shop, the decor of which fascinated Eleanor. They looked at the shop window, and then the girl saw how many beautiful things this house provided. Keller took the maple leaf ornament and pinned it to the lady's hair. He thought it suited her very well. Eleanor froze in embarrassment, and the guy, smiling tenderly, asked her to look, asking if she looked great. The saleswoman praised the gentleman's taste. As expected from a couple, he immediately chose what suited her so well. In the end, they gave the jewelry to them, but when they left the store, Helen's face was still burning. She wondered if Keller really wasn't embarrassed at all. They grew up with him like brother and sister. Maybe he saw a guardian in her and was probably surprised too, but didn't show it. Does he really dislike romance so much that he simply abandoned the princess? Or did she leave for the capital for a while since she is the emperor's niece? But anyway, it was interesting when he would bring up the subject of divorce. In the original, Keller brought it up as soon as he got back. But now the story is very different, so it is difficult to predict, however. Keller met the princess, as in the original, so there's a good chance he'll bring it up soon. But for now, Eleanor suggested Keller come back. She wanted to show the greenhouse and the laboratory, which they didn't have time to see yesterday after all. A lot had changed during this time. Soon the couple arrived back at the estate, and Eleanor took Keller to the place she wanted to show him first. But on the way they met Sir Byrne, and Eleanor said that they had not seen each other for a long time, assuming that he had been through a lot. Yes, he answered uncertainly, and the lady looked well, which was good, he said, when suddenly a trickle of blood flowed from his nose. Seeing this, Eleanor excitedly informed Sir Byrne that he was bleeding and handed him a handkerchief. The man, surprised, covered the blood flowing from his nose with a handkerchief, but then looked at the gloomy face of his commander and froze. Byrne was scared and didn't understand why he was staring at him like that, and Eleanor told him that he should be more careful. At parting, she asked him to take care of himself, and when they were moving away, Byrne noticed the expression on the gentleman's face, and he wondered in surprise what had just happened, whether this was really the person he knew. A person who is always emotionless, cold, and does not let anyone get close to him can really make such a face. Was it really just for their mistress? And those embraces yesterday were very passionate, he recalled. Maybe Marie was right. Apparently he really was wrong, and scratching the back of his head, he admitted that now he was ashamed in front of them. The couple finally reached the greenhouse. It became very beautiful here. Helen proudly said that she had been through a lot and would show him everything here. After what was said, Eleanor thought what a pity it was that after leaving the estate, she would have to say goodbye to the greenhouse. Not only did she put a lot of effort into it, but she also spent time here with Keller when they were younger. In this part grew rare herbs that were usually found in the mountains. They were amazing. Keller had never seen such a quantity before. But then he noticed the herbs that Helen was still sort of researching, and just then she remembered that it was time to drink this tea again. It was hard to clean up every time she coughed up blood, but then she introduced Keller to other herbs. He asked what it was, and Helen replied, the main ingredient in the medicine she sent him to the battlefield. When he asked, she explained that she was talking about the red pills that she sent. Maybe he hadn't tried them yet, but Keller hadn't even seen them. Trying to clear up the misunderstanding, Eleanor explained that she had sent them by letter, and then Keller said that he had never received a single letter. This made both spouses wary. Eleanor found it hard to believe, and then Keller handed her the only letter from her. It was the letter she had given him before she left, and it turned out he had kept it all this time. Having learned about this situation, Eleanor felt sad. She understood why all this time there were no answers. The letters simply did not reach him. All this time she thought that the war made it difficult for him to send a reply for security reasons, Helen admitted. At the same time, Keller asked her for forgiveness, admitting that all this time he thought that she had forgotten about him. He thought that she didn't want him back, and therefore he assumed that she wasn't writing to him on purpose. It was incredibly offensive, but Keller was able to suppress these feelings, and exhaling, he kissed Helen's wrist, saying that he was truly sorry. From such an unexpected gesture, Eleanor's heart beat faster and her cheeks turned red. Why is he so tactile? But suddenly she pulled away, thinking that maybe she had hugged him too often as a child. She had never been so close to an adult man. Could he really behave the same way with the princess, she wondered? It felt strange, and she didn't remember how it was in the original. However, Keller was offended by his wife's behavior. She had already mentioned earlier that she was waiting for him, so why did she continue to retreat? Pressing his clenched fist to his chest, he asked if she felt disgust when he touched her. Helen did not understand what he was talking about. And Keller asked sadly if it was so unbearable that even a short touch from him disgusted my lady. She held his hand every day, and he didn't understand why she was doing this now. Eleanor was slightly taken aback. She did this because they were children, but now he had become a very strong young man. Of course, she would feel awkward touching him in any way, but how should she explain this to an innocent child? She could not say that such things were meant for lovers, him and the princess, and so she asked Keller to give her his hand. When the guy extended his hand to her, Eleanor asked if he remembered what she had said before, that she was just embarrassed because so much time had passed. She will get used to it, so she asked him not to say such things, because it is not because she does not like him, and asked him not to be upset. By the time the dialogue was coming to an end, Marie came running worriedly after the lady, and she reported that a letter had arrived from the temple. It was obvious that they were planning something now. Still, since the temple handles the mail, they might know what happened to those letters, and so Helen decided to check the contents of the letter. The letter from the temple stated that they would send an exceptionally skilled priest along with the commander of the Holy Knights to the Duchy of Manhwa, and that they would personally come to the castle to greet them. It was incredible that they were now showing themselves. Eleanor thought it might be related to the lost letters, which is why she came running so quickly. The Ticker Temple has found points all over the western continent, including one in the Duchy of Manhwa. But after young Keller became the heir, the priests left, and the temple remained abandoned. And now, they suddenly seemed interested in this land, apparently wanting to make Keller the chosen hero of the god Tiber. This greatly upset Eleanor, as she had thought Princess Larissa would also definitely be here, which she read at the end of the letter. But didn't the emperor say he wanted to set Keller up with his niece? He's probably trying to keep the temple under control. It was annoying how everyone was so desperate to use Keller, but with the princess, everything should be fine. Princess Larissa, the main character, and Keller, the main character, they are destined to be together. She is sure of it. Their marriage would most likely be dissolved soon. She thought a marriage was only valid if it was approved by the temple. If the marriage was concluded in childhood, then it must be confirmed by the temple when both parties reach adulthood. After the second approval, the divorce process becomes much more complicated, but with the first approval, everything is simple. If they were going to get a divorce, now would be the time, but when would Keller tell her? Maybe he is waiting for the princess to arrive to talk, after all. Meeting with Princess Larissa is now a matter of time. She probably won't arrive for another 4 months, so until then she'll be training Keller in the controls and helping him get ready. Her heart was squeezed with excitement as she read the letter, but she could not explain the strange feelings in her heart. They will be a beautiful and perfect couple. It was a little painful, but it was time for Keller's ex-wife Eleanor to leave the stage. The next day, Keller called Byrne to him and asked where his wife's handkerchief was, which she had given him the day before. Byrne didn't quite understand what was being asked of him, and then Keller irritably asked if he should repeat it. Since the war was over, discipline could apparently be forgotten. Byrne immediately stood up straight and asked for forgiveness. When he handed over the handkerchief, Kell angrily asked if it was clean, and Byrne guiltily replied that he had carefully wiped away all traces of blood. Now he told him to get out and stay out of his sight for a while. Byrne asked, "What about the banquet that evening?" As temporary commander, he couldn't let him through, and although he wasn't happy, Keller said he'd make an exception for today. Byrne had taught him well, but still, the master had really changed. He reminded him of what he was like as a child. Was it really because of the lady? However, Byrne was afraid that they would not be able to enjoy the banquet due to the awkward atmosphere among the knights. Among them were those who had taken part in the war and those who had remained in the estate, who were wary of each other, and even mercenaries who swore allegiance to their master on the battlefield. It would be strange if there were no disagreements between them. Oh God, Byrne sighed heavily. How could he get them to work together, hoping that nothing would happen at the banquet? However, those who arrived at the banquet were not at all expected, neither the knights nor the owners of the estate themselves. They burst into the banquet hall with an appeal to his grace and asked for forgiveness, begging him to show mercy. However, Keller frowned and said that he did not remember inviting people he had never seen before the men were trembling. Earlier, the vassal of the House of Manhwa, Baron Garcia, banged on the table and shouted that he thought that this low-born bastard would only come back dead. The Baron didn't expect him to return alive. If that bastard had died, the Emperor would have handed over the estate to the Count of Bologna without question. He put everything on it and sided with the Count, but then, as if inopportunely, he returned as a war hero, and it was time to change sides. He informed and suggested to the other vassals that they should ask for his forgiveness in any way. It was the former duke who dissolved the council, so they had an excuse, but wasn't it the former duke who dismissed them as vassals? The man's words were true, and then Garcia asked them if they thought those who fought in the war would be treated favorably. Having voiced his question, it seemed as if an idea had dawned on the Baron, and grinning, he informed the council that he had a good idea. Now the vassal of Venois, Baron Bernard, who was already present at the banquet, told his lordship that those who did not fight had their reasons. And he asked if he could at least listen to them. Maybe they really were sorry, Keller asked. Vassal? Why should he waste his precious time listening to pathetic excuses? The men who came to ask for forgiveness were shaking like a bath leaf. The boy seemed very frightening to them. Bernard tried to convince his lordship by saying that they were still vassals of the House of Venois. And then Keller asked him if they would allow the banquet that his wife had prepared to be spoiled. And this is for the sake of those egoists who came only for forgiveness. Bernard had no words. His hands were also shaking with fear. But suddenly he exclaimed that they too had sworn their allegiance to him and asked to give them a chance. Then Keller called out to Byrne. The guy was tired of fighting with people who did not understand words and ordered them to be removed from his house. But then Eleanor stopped her husband in mid-sentence, placing her hand on his. Keller turned to look at Milady to see what she wanted, and Eleanor shook her head. Due to the vassals that appeared out of nowhere, the knights were unable to enjoy the banquet, even though it was meant for them. And yet the timing was not ideal, but she had long been hoping that the vassals would come to apologize. She didn't like them, but she wanted Keller to be openly acknowledged. Of course, Keller's achievements were so great that he didn't need it. But still, the expansion of Keller's influence will not hurt. The imperial family and the Council of Nobles will definitely try to use it. While Eleanor was thinking about this, Keller also managed to think everything over and, in honor of confirmation, he locked Helen's hand and his own. The Duchess, who had not expected such a gesture, almost screamed and blushed, looking at Keller with embarrassment. And the Duke himself calmly and confidently said, "It's good that he at least heard their apologies." The vassals rejoiced. While they joyfully worshipped and thanked Keller, each introducing themselves to him, Eleanor was restless. She thought with embarrassment that she couldn't bear it. He was holding her hand in front of everyone, and he wasn't even going to let go. Soon, Eleanor gave in and acknowledged his victory, but immediately became tense, wondering what the reason was. She thought that Baron Bernard, who fought alongside Keller, would be against the other vassals, so why was he on their side? However, the answer did not take long to come, as at a personal meeting, Baron Bernard stated that he could not recognize her as the Duchess of Manhwa. And asking for forgiveness for saying such things, he asked that she divorce Mr. Keller as soon as possible. The council greeted Baron Bernard from the war in a friendly manner, sincerely glad that he could greet both him and his lordship. Baron Garcia burst into Baron Bernard's house and now kept repeating this, which was quite impudent. The vassal, who had recently returned from war, thanked him for the warm welcome and asked what had brought him here. Garcia asked if it was not a matter of time before their duchy would return to its former glory. Bernard replied that he should not talk about it. Garcia also wanted to swear allegiance to his lordship and go to the front together, but of course everyone had their own opportunities. It was simply ridiculous, thought Bernard. Everyone knew that all this time he had been sucking up to Count Bologna and asking him to leave when he had finished. But he continued to say what a wonderful man his lordship had become. So wouldn't it be right to meet the new Duchess as well? This crazy daughter of Count Maclair as the wife of the hero of the Empire is simply outrageous. The one who had not even taken part in the war was now pretending to care about his lordship, but still there was truth in his words, the Baron thought. The girl who had never sent a single letter while her husband was at war, Garcia saw the Baron give in to his words and grin. And so he said that he had heard that Baron Bernard's granddaughter was very beautiful and intelligent, and that the Duchess should live up to that standard. These words gave impetus, and now Bernard met with the Duchess with a statement, saying that his lordship needed strong support nearby. So if his granddaughter becomes a duchess, she will be able to be of great help, and he will, of course, recognize her efforts to develop the lands. His lordship hadn't even received the official temple seal, so he was essentially saying that Eleanor was unsuitable and should leave, a ridiculous statement. That's why the Baron sided with the vassals. If she didn't intend to get a divorce, they would officially bring it up for consideration by the council. Eleanor raised her eyebrows and asked if this question really required the approval of the vassals. They might get divorced one day, but she wouldn't let Keller be manipulated like that, and she doubted his granddaughter would help his lordship. The words about his granddaughter hurt the Baron, but of course she was still more useful than anyone from the Maclair family. She didn't mean herself. But hadn't he heard that the Emperor was considering Princess Larissa as a match for His Highness? Keller already had a leading lady, a princess, so he couldn't hope for this, Eleanor thought indignantly. And she was also the Emperor's niece, so the words that the granddaughter of a simple vassal would be more useful are just nonsense. While Bernard was stunned, Eleanor exhaled. She thought it would all be over when Keller returned and signed the divorce papers. And then she told the Baron that she was sure he understood that none of these remarks should be addressed to her, the Duchess. "It's so disrespectful," she said with a sigh, asking if perhaps this place was too high for his granddaughter. "Moreover, bald guys are not allowed to enter, so leave. It is clear that Princess Larissa is destined for Keller." Things were taking a strange turn. She didn't care when Keller was at war, the Baron thought, clenching his fist. And now she pretends to be worried, but she is no different from Baron Garcia, too impudent. After thinking it all over, the unpleasant man finally said that the more he thought about it, the more confusing it became. He asked if she thought she had any right to worry about his lordship, and Helen frowned in indignation and asked what he was talking about. Suddenly, the bald man jumped up from his seat and shouted that she hadn't thought about him for so many years, so how dare she give him advice now? He was shouting that she didn't deserve to be a duchess when Keller burst into the room and angrily asked what he was talking about. The Duke asked Baron Bernard who he was to say who might be the duchess. Bernard, worried and stammering, explained that he had said this only out of loyalty to him as a vassal. The man wondered why his lordship was protecting this woman and why he was angry, and Keller clenched his teeth and pulled out his blade. Unable to tolerate such treatment of his wife, Keller swung his sword at the man, causing him to fall on his backside in fear. Bernard stuttered and asked for mercy for his lordship, asked him to calm down, but Keller was furious. The Duke swung at his vassal a second time, but then Eleanor came up to him and tremblingly asked his lordship to calm down. She was so afraid she couldn't even look him in the eye, and realizing that he had frightened his wife, Keller threw the sword to the floor. He turned to his milady with care and tenderness, and Eleanor sadly squeezed his hand in hers. She thought that this was nothing to be angry about, but he got so mad just hearing the end of the conversation. If he had heard everything, Baron Bernard would already be dead. But then Heinz burst into the room asking the gentleman what had happened. Looking around at all this mess, the mercenary wondered what had happened here to create such a mess. The man immediately began to blame the woman for everything, while Eleanor turned to Bernard and asked if he was okay. Heinz thought she was trying to manipulate the commander into exiling Baron Bernard. Unbelievable. Eleanor told the Baron that that was enough for today, and that he could go. But then Bernard met Keller's gaze and shuddered. Keller Venois looked at him with such a murderous gaze that Bernard began to panic again. At that very moment, the Baron jumped up from his seat and, running away in fear, said that he would come next time. Heinz noted that the Baron looked pathetic. Why didn't the commander just get rid of this woman? The Duke was still angry with the Baron, and, turning rudely to Heinz, she ordered him to leave immediately. The man obeyed the order, but turned around at the end, thinking that the commander had changed a lot because of this woman. They couldn't just sit back. Once the princess arrived, he had to find a way to bring them together. Maybe then the commander would be back to normal. If he wanted to punish the vassals, then he should have done it officially through the court, Helen said, looking at the floor in confusion. She said sadly that on the battlefield everything could have been different, but they were on the estate, and he was the master. Keller was afraid to touch Eleanor, thinking that she must be very scared because of him, and so he was the first to make contact, smiling and apologizing to Milady for frightening her. Eleanor raised her head to look at Keller, who admitted his mistake, and then she replied that she was fine and was almost not scared. However, Keller clearly saw that her hands were shaking, which made him realize that she was lying, and he continued, "The Baron insulted her." Helen didn't think it was an insult, but Keller interrupted her, saying that it was, and that he had been insulted too. The guy looked at her with concern and care, and she never thought that Keller would care about her so much. Calming down, she took his hand and said that despite this, he was the one who supported him on the battlefield. She knew it was hard to treat other vassals well, but she hoped he would become a master who would earn their respect. It would be good if he held meetings with vassals in the same way, but if he kills his comrade, his reputation could fall greatly. Keller agreed with Helen, although all these meetings, temple supervision and support of vassals were of no use to him, and he didn't even care about his reputation. Hearing Keller say that he agreed that she was completely right, Eleanor was able to breathe a sigh of relief. Keller couldn't go against his wife, and after thinking about it, he realized that he just needed to not kill him. And so he invited this impudent baron into his office, looking at him menacingly, putting psychological pressure on him. Bernard felt ashamed and wanted to repent, but then Keller said that having listened to his wife, he decided to pardon him for his former fidelity. He would give him another chance to show his loyalty. Bernard perked up, but then the Duke indicated that he was giving him 2 months. From the way he spoke of the Duchess, he seemed unaware of how much work his wife had done as his acting mistress. He must find out this himself when he writes a report about it, and also spend time with his family and say goodbye to them. The last condition frightened the Baron. The Duke explained that during his patrol, he heard that the number of monsters in the Forest of Death had increased, and he would spend the rest of his time there. To be honest, Keller would have sent him immediately, but if he suddenly disappeared, his wife might misunderstand him. But suddenly, Baron Bernard protested. This was nonsense. He had just returned to his family. Shouldn't he spend the rest of his life with them? "Ah," Keller drawled dramatically, and asked if it was true, saying that he would then move with his family. "Your Grace," the Baron called out loudly, but then Keller, crossing his arms, asked since when he had been questioning his orders. He asked coldly if his loyalty had already disappeared. If he hadn't just acted as if he was ready to die for him, the Baron resigned himself. Coming out of the Duke's office, Bernard turned cold and fell to his knees, thinking in horror that he had just returned. How could his lordship treat him like this, when suddenly it seemed he realized that it was the witch duchess who had enchanted him? She said she made strange potions. She must have used one on him, otherwise his lordship would never have sent him away. What the hell? He should have immediately investigated the duchess's case, the baron thought with hatred. And if his lordship and Ariana got closer, then he would come to his senses. In any case, it was necessary to act quickly. Ariana was indignant. She had come all this way because her grandfather had said that he would introduce her to the Duke. But the Duke didn't even pretend that he was interested in chatting with her, and the grandfather suddenly disappeared somewhere. What's wrong with this Duke? The beautiful, sweet Ariana came to him and he just ignored her. Is it because he is a Duke? She has a prince anyway. Even if she were given a whole train car of dukes, she would not choose anyone. The girl thought sadly that it was a waste of time. She even put on a beautiful dress, sadly. But walking through the garden, the girl suddenly saw a rose bush and ran up to it in delight. Pink was her favorite color. How beautiful! And the prince who helped her in childhood when she almost fell had pink hair. The girl gave in to the memories and began to think, when suddenly a voice asked if the roses were not beautiful. Ariana looked around irritably, saying that she was scared when she spoke, but suddenly froze. Her gaze stopped on the girl's pink hair. It was the same as the prince's. Eleanor apologized if she frightened her. Eleanor guessed that she was the granddaughter of Baron Bernard. The girl asked in surprise if she knew Ariana. The Duchess realized that the girl was speaking about herself in the third person, and remembered that Keller had done the same when he was very little. Eleanor complimented her on her pink dress. It was beautiful and suited her very well, after which she said goodbye. Wishing her a good day, Ariana thought that if this was a noblewoman from Manhwa, then this was a duchess. She came to look at Ariana in case the Duke fell in love with her. Did she really think that she would be happy with a simple compliment? She had already managed to stick her tongue out at the Duchess and make a face, but she still smiled happily, thinking that at least she had good taste.